Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to an era where the flickering flame of a tallow candle was your only light against the encroaching darkness, and the whispers in the alleyways carried more weight than any printed newspaper. You're trudging through muddy, uneven streets, the smell of damp earth and wood smoke heavy in the air, your breath misting in the chill. This wasn't just a time before Wi-Fi or even decent plumbing. It was a world where the line between reality and the truly bizarre was incredibly thin, blurred by fear, superstition, and a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated imagination. Tonight, we delve into the dark corners of the medieval mind, exploring the unbelievable urban legends that terrified and fascinated ordinary people. You probably won't survive 5 minutes in this world without contracting something unpleasant or being accused of witchcraft. But hey, at least you'll have some good stories. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine, if you will, a world utterly devoid of what we consider basic information. No internet, no television, no radio, not even widely available books. You live in a small village or a bustling, yet incredibly cramped town. Your world stretches only as far as your feet can carry you, or perhaps a day's journey by horse, which, let's be honest, is probably the equivalent of a brisk walk for most of us modern folk. News travels by word of mouth, distorted and embellished with every retelling, like a game of medieval telephone played across entire kingdoms. If something strange happened, a crop failing, a child disappearing, a sudden illness, there wasn't a scientific explanation readily available. There was only the whisper, the rumor, the story passed from neighbor to neighbor, growing teeth and claws with each anxious breath. This was the fertile, often terrifying ground where urban legends took root and blossomed into full-blown societal anxieties. You see, for the average medieval person, life was a constant tightrope walk between survival and disaster. Famine, plague, war, and random acts of violence were not abstract concepts, they were ever-present realities. When your entire harvest could be wiped out by a sudden frost, or a mysterious illness could decimate your family in a week, you looked for answers, for explanations, for control, wherever you could find it. If a strange woman arrived in town just before a rash of sickness, was it merely coincidence, or was she a witch, her evil eye casting a pall over the community? If a child vanished, was it a simple accident, or had some unseen, malevolent force spirited them away? These questions, fueled by genuine fear and a lack of empirical understanding, were the very fabric from which legends were woven. Think about it. In a time when the vast majority of people couldn't read or write, a mainstream historical fact often overlooked in our text-heavy world, oral tradition was paramount. Stories weren't just entertainment. They were history, news, morality lessons, and warnings, all rolled into one captivating, often chilling, package. You gather around the hearth on a cold winter's night, the firelight dancing on the rough-hewn walls, and your grandmother, her face lined with a lifetime of hard work, begins a tale. It starts with a hushed voice, describing something that happened just down the road, or in the next village over. Suddenly, the sounds of the wind outside become the cries of a lost soul, the shadows cast by the fire transform into lurking monsters, and your imagination, unfettered by modern skepticism, runs wild. It's like the ultimate campfire story, but with real-world stakes. And no, there wasn't a medieval Snopes website to debunk the claim that the mayor's cat was actually a shape-shifting imp. You just had to take old Agnes's word for it, and Agnes had seen some things, bless her heart. The fascination with these legends wasn't just about fear, it was also about understanding. They provided a framework, however fantastical, for making sense of a chaotic world. If a plague swept through, it wasn't just a disease. It was the wrath of God, or the work of a demon, or perhaps the result of some terrible sin committed by the community. Knowing why it was happening, even if the why was utterly supernatural, offered a perverse kind of comfort. It meant there was a cause, and perhaps a way to appease or defeat it. You could pray, you could perform a ritual, you could hunt down the supposed culprit. It gave people a sense of agency in the face of overwhelming powerlessness. Consider the sheer lack of stimulation in medieval life compared to ours. No streaming services, no social media feeds, not even a daily newspaper to scroll through. Storytelling was a primary form of entertainment. And what's more entertaining than a tale that sends shivers down your spine, that makes you pull your cloak a little tighter, and check under your bed or, more likely, your straw pallet, before you drift off to sleep? These legends were the blockbuster movies and true crime podcasts of their day, only with far more immediate, personal relevance. If you heard a story about a greedy miller being dragged to hell by unseen hands, you might think twice about shortchanging your neighbor on grain. If you heard about a child who wandered too far into the woods and was never seen again, you'd probably keep your own kids on a much tighter leash. It's also worth noting the quirky, fringe tidbits that permeated daily life and fed into these legends. For instance, many medieval people genuinely believed that certain animals were inherently evil or good, not just based on their behavior, but on their very nature. Cats, especially black ones, were often associated with witchcraft and the devil, leading to widespread persecution and, ironically, a rise in the rat population, which probably contributed to more plagues, thereby reinforcing the belief that cats were bad luck. It was a vicious, furry cycle. Similarly, the belief in sympathetic magic, where influences meant that bizarre rituals were commonplace. If you wanted to cure a fever, you might try to transfer it to an animal, or wear a specific charm made from the teeth of a dead dog. Logic wasn't always the guiding star, you see. Historians still argue whether these legends were genuinely believed by everyone, or if they functioned more as cautionary tales for the uneducated masses, or perhaps as a form of social commentary or even just plain entertainment. It's a nuanced debate, but what's clear is that they permeated the collective consciousness. They weren't just stories. They were part of the landscape, influencing how people viewed their neighbors, the natural world, and the unseen forces they believed governed their lives. The fear of the unknown was palpable, and these legends gave shape to that formless dread. They provided names and faces to the lurking anxieties, making them both more terrifying and, strangely, more manageable. When you can name the monster, even if it's a fictional one, you feel like you have a tiny bit of power over it. Or at least, you know what to run from. So, as we prepare to explore some of the most insane medieval urban legends, remember the context: a world where information was scarce, life was brutal, and the imagination was a powerful, untamed beast. These weren't just quaint old stories. They were reflections of deep-seated fears, profound beliefs, and the desperate human need to make sense of a world that often seemed utterly senseless. They are the echoes of a time when every shadow could hide a monster, and every strange sound in the night could be a harbinger of doom. And in a way, they remind us that even today, in our hyper-connected, scientifically advanced world, there's still a part of us that loves a good, chilling story that makes us wonder, what if? Now, let's truly immerse ourselves in the everyday reality of a medieval town, because it's within these very confines that our insane urban legends found their perfect breeding ground. You step out of your cramped, timber-framed house, perhaps sharing a wall with a stable or a tannery, or maybe even just a particularly enthusiastic chicken coop. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Oh, the smell. It's a complex bouquet of wood smoke, human and animal waste, unwashed bodies, rotting refuse, and whatever delightful concoction the local artisan is brewing or tanning. It's a sensory assault that, frankly, makes you appreciate modern plumbing and deodorant more than you ever thought possible. You immediately find yourself jostled by a throng of people. These streets, narrow and winding, weren't designed for personal space. You're rubbing shoulders with merchants hawking their wares, apprentices dashing on errands, peasants bringing produce from the fields, and beggars seeking alms. Everyone is packed in a constant, churning river of humanity. Sunlight struggles to penetrate the gaps between the tall, leaning buildings, making the alleys feel perpetually dim, even at midday. At night, it's a darkness you rarely experience now, broken only by the occasional flickering lantern or the distant glow from a tavern window. This isn't just atmospheric, it's crucial. In such close quarters, with so little privacy, and even less reliable information, human interaction becomes a constant, low-level hum of observation, speculation, and, most importantly, gossip. Imagine trying to get accurate news in this environment. There are no newspapers, no broadcasts. Your primary source of information is the person standing next to you, who heard it from someone else, who might have heard it from a traveler who passed through last week. This is where the phrase, "rumors traveled faster than any horse," truly comes alive. A whisper at the communal well about a strange light seen in the graveyard last night could, by lunchtime, transform into a full-blown tale of necromancers raising the dead. By evening, the entire town might be convinced that a spectral army is marching towards their gates, all from a single, innocent observation. It's like a viral tweet, but instead of likes and retweets, it spreads through hushed tones and wide eyes, gathering fear and embellishment with every single utterance. And unlike a tweet, you couldn't just scroll past it. This was your reality. The sheer density of medieval urban populations, a mainstream historical fact that often surprises us, as cities like Paris or London, though smaller in absolute numbers than today, were incredibly packed within their walls, meant that news, and especially bad news, could spread like wildfire. Taverns were natural hotbeds of rumor, fueled by ale and loosening tongues. Marketplaces, bustling with people from various regions, were another prime location for the exchange of whispered tales. The church, too, served as a central hub, not just for spiritual guidance, but for the dissemination of information, both official pronouncements and unofficial anxieties that bubbled up during services or after communal gatherings. Even the local laundresses, often working together by the river or public washhouse, were notorious carriers of every local secret and speculation. They knew everything. If you wanted to start a rumor that the mayor's new hat was made from the fur of a cursed badger, the laundresses were your best bet for rapid dissemination. This constant flow of unverified information profoundly shaped the very fabric of daily life and fear. You couldn't escape it. If a rumor started that a certain family was cursed, or that a specific house was haunted, it could lead to social ostracization, economic ruin, or even violence. People genuinely believed that malevolent forces, whether witches, demons, or just plain evil neighbors, could influence their lives. So, when a rumor about such a force emerged, it wasn't just idle chatter. It was a potential threat to your crops, your health, your very soul. You might start avoiding certain streets, eyeing strangers with deep suspicion, or even participating in the public shaming or accusations of those targeted by the latest whisper. It made everyone a potential victim, or a potential accuser. Consider the psychological toll this must have taken. Imagine living in a world where every cough could be the start of a plague, every stranger a potential demon in disguise, and every unexplained event a sign of supernatural malevolence. There was no scientific method to fall back on, no official news channel to verify fact. Your reality was constructed from the collective anxieties and superstitions of your community. It's like living in a constant state of low-grade paranoia, where the boogeyman isn't just under your bed. He might be your next-door neighbor or the baker down the street. It also meant that if you were the subject of a particularly nasty rumor, your reputation, your livelihood, and even your life could be in grave danger, with little recourse. It was a very real form of social control, often enforced by the threat of mob mentality. One quirky or fringe tidbit from this era that highlights the power of public opinion and rumor is the existence of the scold's bridle, or brank. This was a horrifying iron muzzle, sometimes fitted with a metal plate that pressed down on the tongue, used as a public punishment for women deemed to be gossips or scolds. While it might seem like a drastic measure for merely talking too much, it underscores how seriously the authorities and the community viewed the power of uncontrolled speech and rumor. It wasn't just about rudeness. It was about preventing the spread of sedition, heresy, or panic through unchecked whispers. The very existence of such a device shows how much fear and control was wrapped up in the transmission of information or misinformation. You wouldn't see a modern equivalent unless Twitter decided to invent a physical muzzle for its most notorious users, which, honestly, would simplify a lot of things. The ease with which these rumors could escalate from mere whispers to widespread panic is something historians still debate, the precise extent to which these daily rumors directly led to widespread panic or sustained social control, versus being merely a form of localized entertainment or coping mechanism. Was it constant low-level anxiety, or did people take it all with a pinch of salt, only really reacting when events directly impacted them? Regardless, the potential for escalation was always there. A rumor about a ritual murder, for example, could very quickly turn into a violent pogrom against a minority group, fueled by centuries of ingrained prejudice and the instantaneous spread of fear. There was no time for cooler heads to prevail, no official investigation to verify claims. The rumor was the truth, at least until the next one came along. So, as you navigate these bustling, smelly, dimly lit streets, you're not just walking through a physical space. You're walking through a dense web of interconnected fears and belief. Every shadow, every strange sound, every unusual person becomes a potential trigger for a new story, a new whisper, a new terror. The air itself feels thick with unspoken anxieties, and the lines between reality and imagination are constantly blurring. It's a world where the monsters aren't just in the dark forests outside the city walls. They're here, in the crowded marketplace, in the alleyways, lurking just beyond the flickering reach of your lantern. And sometimes, they're even in the eyes of your neighbor, fueled by a rumor that started with a simple misunderstanding and grew into something truly monstrous. Close your eyes for a moment, if you're comfortable, and allow your imagination to transport you. You're not snug in your bed anymore. Instead, you're standing on a narrow, uneven cobblestone street, somewhere in the heart of a bustling medieval city. The air around you is thick, a complex tapestry of scents. The sharp tang of wood smoke curling from countless hearths, the earthy dampness rising from the unpaved alleyways, the faint, cloying sweetness of brewing ale, and the undeniable, ever-present aroma of human and animal life, and, let's be honest, their waste. It's not quite the fragrant, pristine urban environment we might imagine today. The light is perpetually dim here. Even in the brightest part of the day, the tall, timber-framed houses lean inwards, their upper stories almost touching across the street, creating perpetual tunnels of shadow. Sunlight struggles to pierce the gloom, filtering down in dusty, hazy shafts that illuminate dancing motes in the air. At night, it's a profound, inky blackness, broken only by the flickering glow of a distant lantern, the occasional torch held aloft by a night watchman, or the warm, inviting spill of light from a tavern doorway. You can almost feel the chill seeping up from the damp stones beneath your feet, a constant reminder of the raw, unrefined nature of this world. The sounds are a cacophony, yet strangely rhythmic. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the incessant bleating of sheep being herded to market, the rumble of wooden carts over the cobblestones, and the indistinguishable murmur of hundreds, thousands of voices. You hear the sharp, nasal cries of street vendors hawking their wares: fresh fish, get your fresh fish, or hot pies, blending with the deeper, sonorous peal of church bells marking the hours. Every now and then, a dog barks, a cat yowls, or a child's laughter rings out, quickly swallowed by the general din. It's a world that assaults your senses, demanding your full attention, leaving little room for quiet contemplation. And in this densely packed, sensory-rich environment, human bodies are everywhere. You're constantly jostled, bumped, and brushed against as you move. People are not isolated in their homes. They live, work, and socialize in public spaces. The market square is a swirling vortex of activity, the churchyard a gathering place after services, and the local tavern, well, that's practically the community living room. Privacy, as we understand it today, is a foreign concept. Your neighbors know your business, and you certainly know theirs. There are no soundproof walls, no personal devices to retreat into. Life is lived out loud, in close proximity, for all to see and hear. This constant, intimate proximity, combined with the lack of widespread formal communication, created the perfect breeding ground for stories. Think about it. There were no newspapers, no radio, certainly no internet. So, when we say whispers traveled faster than any horse, we're not necessarily talking about literal speed across vast distances, though news certainly did travel, albeit slowly, along trade routes. Instead, we're talking about the astonishing velocity with which a story, a rumor, a piece of shocking hearsay, could saturate a dense urban population. Imagine a single spark igniting a dry field. That's how quickly a juicy bit of gossip or a chilling tale could spread through these crowded streets. It could start with a single, hushed conversation in the market square, a worried aside exchanged over a communal well, or a drunken boast in a noisy tavern. By the time you'd finished your morning bread, the story could be common knowledge across half the city. No Wi-Fi, no Twitter, just good old-fashioned ear-to-ear transmission, often with a generous side of dramatic flair. This was the original viral content, but instead of adorable cat videos, you were getting tales of witches, goblins, and perhaps the latest fashion faux pas of the Lord's daughter, a witch, in some circles, was equally terrifying. The information or misinformation wasn't just relayed, it was performed. A grimace, a shiver, a wide-eyed stare, these were the special effects of the medieval news cycle. And because so much of life was uncertain, unpredictable, and often brutal, people were hungry for explanations, for narratives that made sense of the chaotic world around them. They sought patterns, omens, and reasons for disease, famine, or sudden disappearances. If a child vanished, it wasn't just a tragedy. It had to be the work of a malevolent spirit, a wicked witch, or a mysterious stranger. The very darkness of the streets, the impenetrable shadows that clung to every alley and doorway, played tricks on the mind. A rustle in the bushes could be a rat, or it could be something far more sinister. A strange silhouette at the end of a street could be a neighbor, or it could be a creature of the night. And speaking of things that scurried, the sheer number of animals, from stray dogs to the ever-present rats, meant that any unusual animal behavior, a cat suddenly appearing on a windowsill, or a dog howling mournfully for no apparent reason, could quickly be twisted into an omen or a sign of something sinister afoot. It was like a game of telephone played across an entire city, except the stakes were a bit higher than whether Sally sells seashells ended up as Harry smells cheese. This constant flow of whispers shaped the very fabric of daily life and fear. What you heard on the street could determine who you trusted, which part of town you avoided after dark, or even who you blamed for a failed harvest. A rumor could protect a community by warning of perceived dangers, or it could ignite a terrifying wave of persecution against an innocent group. It was a powerful, unregulated force, capable of building reputations or utterly destroying them, all without a single written word. Historians still argue whether the speed and reach of these medieval whispers truly outpaced the more formal, official pronouncements of the time, or if they merely filled the gaps where official news was slow or non-existent. But there's no doubt that in these crowded, dimly lit streets, every creak, every shadow, and every hushed conversation held the potential to spark a legend, to breathe life into the unbelievable, and to send shivers down the spines of ordinary people. And it's into this fertile ground of fear and imagination that our first legend takes root. You trudge along the uneven cobblestone streets, the chill of the medieval night seeping into your bones. Above you, the moon, a sliver of silver in the inky blackness, casts long, dancing shadows that seem to stretch and writhe like unseen spirits. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, a faint, lingering echo of the day's fires. Most windows are dark, little more than vacant eyes in the timber-framed houses that lean precariously inwards, as if whispering secrets to each other across the narrow alleyways. A dog barks in the distance, a lonely sound that only amplifies the profound quiet. Here, in the heart of a world utterly unlike our own, where every rustle in the bushes, every gust of wind, could be interpreted as a sign or a portent, fear wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of daily life. And then you look up. High above, silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon, loom the silent, stony sentinels of the great cathedral. They are everywhere, perched on cornices, clinging to buttresses, peering down from every conceivable nook and cranny. These are the gargoyles, the grotesque stone figures that adorn the medieval churches, sculpted with an unsettling blend of artistry and nightmare. Their faces are contorted into snarls, grimaces, and wide-mouthed roars. Some are beasts you recognize, lions, griffins, dragons, but many are chimeric horrors, impossible fusions of bat wings, serpent tails, and human features twisted into expressions of pure, unadulterated menace. They leer, they gape, they seem to watch your every step with unblinking, stony eyes. They are, quite frankly, terrifying even in broad daylight, but tonight, under the moon's cold, watchful gaze, they take on an entirely different, far more sinister quality. This is where our first truly insane medieval urban legend takes root. The chilling belief that these grotesque stone gargoyles, these silent watchers of the night, might, under the moon's gaze, spring to terrifying life. Imagine the shiver that would run down your spine as you hurried past the towering cathedral walls. You'd try not to look up, of course, because looking up meant meeting those vacant, stony stares, and that was when the whispers would start in your mind. The whispers that said these weren't just decorative carvings, but dormant creatures, held captive by the light of day, waiting for the cloak of darkness to shed their stony slumber. It was a common enough whisper in the taverns and by the hearths, a legend passed from hushed voice to trembling ear. People genuinely believed that when the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, and the town settled into its uneasy sleep, the gargoyles would stir. You could almost hear it, couldn't you? A faint, grinding sound like ancient teeth clenching, as the stone muscles began to flex. Perhaps a faint crackle, as centuries of dust and moss flaked away from their awakening forms. They weren't just decorative, they were alive, or at least they could be. And if they were alive, what then? Would they stretch their leathery wings, if they had them, and take flight into the moonlit sky? Or would they simply detach themselves from their perches, their heavy, stone bodies thudding onto the cobblestones below, ready to stalk the deserted streets? It certainly gives a whole new meaning to Stone Cold Killer, doesn't it? Now, before you start picturing a medieval version of a monster movie where the statues come to life like some forgotten 80s horror flick, let's inject a little historical context. The mainstream historical fact about gargoyles is that their primary purpose was surprisingly mundane. They were functional waterspouts. The word gargoyle itself comes from the Old French word gargoyle, meaning throat or gullet, and also referring to the gurgling sound of water. These architectural features were designed to direct rainwater away from the walls of the building, preventing erosion and protecting the masonry from water damage. Without them, centuries of rain would have slowly, relentlessly, washed away the mortar and weakened the very structure of these magnificent cathedrals. So, in their practical, day-to-day existence, they were essentially medieval drainpipe. Quite the heroic job, really. Imagine explaining that to your stone-carving buddies at the medieval pub. Yeah, I spent 3 months on this terrifying beast, and it's basically just a fancy gutter. But their practical purpose didn't diminish their symbolic power, or the fear they inspired. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Beyond their utilitarian role, gargoyles were also believed to serve an apotropaic function. That's a fancy way of saying they were thought to ward off evil spirits. by depicting hideous, demonic, or monstrous figures on the outside of sacred buildings. The idea was that these grotesque visages would scare away any malevolent entities attempting to enter the holy space. It was like fighting fire with ugliness. The medieval mind was a fascinating place, full of paradoxes. You build a beautiful house of God, and then you stick these terrifying, fanged abominations all over it to keep the other terrifying abominations out. It's almost as if they were saying, "Look, we've already got the scariest monsters here, so you lesser demons can just move along." The sheer variety of these creatures is astounding. You'll find everything from traditional beasts to strange hybrids, and even caricatures of real people or humorous scenes. Some historians even suggest that some gargoyles were deliberately designed to be comical or satirical, offering a brief moment of levity amidst the solemnity of the church. But even a comical stone figure, under the right conditions, say, the dead of night, after a few too many flagons of ale, could take on a chilling aspect. So, how deeply was this legend believed? Did people genuinely think the gargoyles were going to swoop down and snatch them from their beds? Historians still argue whether the belief in animated gargoyles was a widespread, deeply held conviction, or more of a metaphorical fear, a fun, if terrifying, bit of folklore shared around the fire. Was it a genuine, visceral terror, or more akin to our modern-day enjoyment of a good horror movie, where you know it's not real, but it still gives you a thrilling jolt? Perhaps it was a bit of both, depending on the individual, the village, and how much wine had been consumed. But the fact that the legend persisted and was so widely known suggests it tapped into a very real undercurrent of fear and superstition in the medieval world. They lived in a world where the line between the natural and supernatural was incredibly thin, where miracles and curses were everyday possibilities, and where the devil literally lurked around every corner. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to imagine that a stone monster might decide to go for a midnight stroll. Imagine the sounds you'd think you heard. The wind whistling through their open mouths, creating an eerie, mournful moan. The creak of old timber in the cathedral roof, sounding like the shifting of colossal stone limbs. The patter of rain, mimicking the soft landing of heavy, clawed feet. You'd pull your cloak tighter, quicken your pace, your eyes darting nervously upwards, just checking. Just making sure. Because what if one of them did move? What if that shadow wasn't just a trick of the moonlight, but the slow, deliberate turn of a stony head? You certainly wouldn't want to be the one to find out. Trying to outrun a sentient stone monster probably isn't high on anyone's list of fun medieval activities. And think of the logistical nightmare. Imagine a gargoyle trying to open a door with its giant, clawed stone hand. Probably not very graceful. This urban legend, born from the very architecture designed to protect the holy and mundane alike, shows us how easily fear can twist the familiar into the monstrous. The very protectors of the church became, in the dark corners of the medieval imagination, potential terrors themselves. It's a testament to the power of suggestion, the fear of the unknown, and the way the human mind can conjure nightmares from the most unlikely of sources. The gargoyles silently watched the town by day, performing their humble duty of shedding water, but by night, in the whispers and shadows, they transformed into something far more sinister, the embodiment of a primal fear, waiting for the perfect moonlit moment to awaken. You've pictured them now, perched high above, their ancient, weathered faces staring down from the great Gothic cathedrals. You can almost feel the cold, rough stone beneath your fingertips as you imagine these silent sentinels. Originally, these grotesque figures, these gargoyles, served a very practical, if somewhat unglamorous, purpose. They were the medieval equivalent of elaborate rain gutters, designed to channel rainwater away from the building's walls, protecting the fragile mortar and stonework from erosion. Think of them as the unsung heroes of medieval plumbing, preventing damp patches and moss growth, albeit with a flair for the dramatic. If only all our modern downspouts had such personality, you might actually enjoy cleaning them out. But in the medieval mind, practical function often mingled seamlessly with profound superstition. You see, it wasn't just about diverting water, it was about diverting evil. The very word gargoyle is thought to come from the Old French gargoyle, meaning throat or gullet, and echoing the sound of gurgling water. But these weren't just stone spouts, they were manifestations of the monstrous, designed to terrify and ward off malevolent spirits from entering the sacred space below. You'd look up at their distorted visages, the snarling beasts, the fanged demons, the contorted human-animal hybrids, and feel a shiver, a primal acknowledgement that these were not things of beauty, but rather things of raw, protective power. They were the ultimate bouncers for the holy, the fearsome guardians ensuring no demonic riffraff crashed the celestial party. Yet, as the moon climbed higher and the shadows lengthened, this protective facade began to fray in the popular imagination. The very features that made them effective deterrents, their terrifying visages, their watchful eyes, their perpetually crouched positions, also made them perfect subjects for unsettling whispers. You'd walk home late, perhaps after a particularly potent ale or two, and glance up at your local church. The familiar outlines of the gargoyles, usually just part of the architecture, would seem to shift in the gloom. Was that shadow really moving, or was it just your imagination playing tricks? Did that stone claw just seem a little sharper, a little more poised? This is where the line blurred, where the architectural guardian began its slow, chilling transformation into a potential menace. You see, the medieval world was a place deeply steeped in animism, the belief that spirits inhabit inanimate objects. If a tree could have a spirit, if a river could have a will, why not a stone carving, especially one so deliberately imbued with a monstrous form? The sheer artistry, the detailed carving of muscle and sinew, gave them an unnerving sense of latent life, as if they were merely sleeping, waiting for the right moment to stretch their stony limbs. And when you consider the sheer number of them, often hundreds on a single cathedral, you can almost feel the collective weight of their silent vigil, their unblinking gaze following your every step. It's like being watched by 1,000 stone security cameras, but without the comforting knowledge that someone's actually monitoring the feed. You're just watched. This wasn't just idle fancy, it was a deeply ingrained part of the medieval psyche. There were stories, passed from generation to generation, of gargoyles that would descend from their perches on the eve of great disasters, their roars echoing through the empty streets as a warning. Or, more terrifyingly, on the eve of great sins, their forms twisting into even more hideous shapes as a silent condemnation. Imagine waking to the sound of scraping stone, a sound you can't quite place, and then glimpsing a massive, winged shadow against the pre-dawn sky, knowing it came from the very church you sought solace in. It's the ultimate betrayal, the protector becoming the punisher. One mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked in the romanticized view of gargoyles is their incredible diversity. While many depict fantastical beasts, a surprising number also feature satirical caricatures of local figures, or even grotesque representations of human vices. You might find a monk with a pig's snout, a gluttonous merchant, or a scolding woman, all frozen in stone, their sins literally draining away with the rainwater. This blending of the sacred and the profane, the serious and the satirical, only added to their mystique, making them feel more like living, breathing characters in the urban drama, rather than mere decorative elements. It's like your grumpy neighbor's garden gnome suddenly having a very public, very unflattering doppelganger on the church roof. The quirky or fringe tidbit here often revolved around specific local legends. For instance, in some villages, it was believed that if a gargoyle on the local church ever shed a tear, it foretold a devastating plague or famine. Not just water, mind you, but actual, sorrowful stone tears. And if you were truly unlucky, and happened to be standing directly beneath one when it cried, it was said to mark you for a swift and unpleasant end. So, you'd probably want to avoid standing in the splash zone during a medieval downpour, just in case. Better to get wet than get marked, right? The fear wasn't just that they could come to life, but that their very nature was ambivalent. Were they truly on the side of humanity, or were they merely bound by some ancient, forgotten pact to protect the building, regardless of who was inside? You see them, frozen in their eternal vigil, and you wonder, are they keeping us safe, or are they keeping something else out? And if they're keeping something out, what happens if they fail? Or worse, what happens if they decide the real threat is inside? This ambiguity fostered a deep, unsettling tension. You relied on the church for spiritual comfort, for protection from the devil and his minions, but the very edifice designed to provide that comfort was adorned with creatures that seemed to embody the very things you feared. It's like going to a therapist whose office is decorated with the most unsettling clown collection you've ever seen. You're there for help, but also just a little bit on edge. Historians still argue whether the primary intent behind the grotesque nature of gargoyles was purely apotropaic, to ward off evil, or whether it also served as a visual sermon, a stark reminder of the horrors of sin and hell awaiting the unrighteous. Was their ugliness meant to scare away demons, or to scare you into piety? Or perhaps was it both? You look at their twisted faces, their contorted bodies, and you can almost hear the silent sermon, a chilling warning etched in stone. They are a physical manifestation of the dark forces that medieval people believed lurked just beyond the veil of their ordered world, constantly threatening to break through. And if those forces could be represented in stone with such vivid, terrifying detail, what would they be like in the flesh? So, while you might see them today as fascinating architectural quirks, relics of a bygone era, imagine living in a world where the line between stone and flesh, between symbol and reality, was far more porous. A world where the silent, watchful eyes of the gargoyles could, in the right moonlight, seem to blink. A world where their stony throats, designed to gurgle water, might instead let out a low, guttural growl. And you, walking alone through the dark, cobblestone streets, would feel that chill not just from the night air, but from the unsettling possibility that those ancient, awakened stones were finally ready to descend. Now, let's leave the cold, stone guardians of the cathedrals behind, those silent sentinels whose secrets you've just begun to unravel. We're going to shift our gaze from the looming architecture to something far more insidious, something that whispers through the cobblestone streets not with the creak of ancient stone, but with a haunting, almost hypnotic melody. Prepare yourself, because we're about to step into the grim, unsettling tale of the Pied Piper, a legend that paints a picture of missing children and a town forever scarred by a mysterious stranger and a song that promised deliverance but delivered only despair. Imagine, if you will, the town of Hameln in the late 13th century. You're trudging through its narrow, winding lanes, the air thick with the smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and something else, something foul. It's the stench of an infestation. Not just any infestation, mind you, but one of biblical proportions. Rats. They are everywhere. They scuttle across your path in broad daylight, their beady eyes glinting with unnerving intelligence. They gnaw at the very foundations of homes, they contaminate food stores, and they carry diseases that make even the bravest souls tremble. You hear their incessant scratching behind the wainscoting as you try to sleep, a constant, unsettling reminder of their dominion. The townspeople are at their wits' end, desperate. They've tried everything, traps, cats, even prayers, but the furry tide only seems to swell. It's enough to make you consider moving to a place where the biggest pest is just your nosy neighbor, not a literal plague of rodent. Then, one day, a stranger arrives. He glides into Hameln as if materializing from the very air, a figure unlike any you've ever seen. He's tall, perhaps a little too thin, and his eyes hold an unsettling depth. But it's his attire that truly catches your eye, a coat of many colors, vibrant and mismatched, as if sewn from the remnants of 1,000 different dreams. On his belt hangs a simple wooden pipe, unassuming yet somehow radiating a silent power. He approaches the town council, those pompous, self-important men who usually spend their days debating the precise shade of beige for the new town hall, and offers a solution to their rodent problem. For a hefty sum, 1,000 guilders, a princely sum in those days, he promises to rid Hameln of every single rat. The council, desperate and smelling relief, readily agrees. They shake hands, a pact sealed in desperation and the faint, lingering odor of rodent droppings. You might even hear one of them mutter, 1,000 guilders? That's cheaper than therapy for collective rat trauma. The next morning, the piper steps into the town square, raises his pipe to his lips, and begins to play. It's not a loud, boisterous tune, but something soft, almost ethereal. A melody that seems to weave its way into the very fabric of the air, slithering under doors and through cracks in the walls. And then you see it. From every alleyway, every cellar, every dark corner, the rats emerge. Thousands upon thousands of them, their tiny feet pattering like rain on the cobblestones, their tails swishing like a macabre dance. But they're not scurrying in fear. No, they're marching, almost serenely, following the piper's tune. He walks towards the river Weser, and like a furry, brown river themselves, the rats follow him, straight into the churning waters, where they drown. Every single one. The town breathes a collective sigh of relief, the air suddenly feeling lighter, cleaner. The silence, after weeks of incessant scratching, is almost deafening. It's like when your noisy upstairs neighbors finally move out, pure, unadulterated bliss. The piper returns, expecting his payment. 1,000 guilders, as promised. But now, with the rats gone, the town council, those very same men who swore on their grandmothers' graves, suddenly develop a convenient case of amnesia. 1,000 guilders? They scoff, their chests puffed out with renewed arrogance. For a simple tune? We can barely afford to fix the leaky roof on the granary. Here, take 50. That's more than generous for a day's work. They laugh, their voices echoing in the now clean square, oblivious to the storm they are brewing. They think they've outsmarted the stranger, saved a few coins. Oh, how wrong they are. It's a classic case of short-sightedness, isn't it? Like promising your kids ice cream if they clean their room, then offering them a carrot stick once the room is spotless. Never ends well. The piper's eyes narrow, and a chilling silence descends. He says nothing, simply turns and walks back to the town square. He raises his pipe once more, but this time, the melody is different. It's sweeter, more alluring, a tune that tugs at the heartstrings, promising adventure and wonder. And this time, it's not the rats that emerge. It's the children. Every child in Hameln, from the toddlers barely able to walk to the teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, seems drawn by an irresistible force. Their parents call out, their voices filled with growing panic, but the children don't hear them. Their eyes are wide with an unseeing wonder, fixed solely on the colorful figure of the piper. They skip, they dance, they laugh, following him as he leads them out of the town, towards the base of a looming mountain. You watch, helpless, as the procession disappears into a cavern in the mountainside. The last thing you see is the flash of the piper's vibrant coat, and then silence. An absolute, terrifying silence. Not one child returns. Not a single one. Hameln is left a ghost town of grieving parents, their laughter extinguished, their homes filled with an unbearable void. The legend, which became deeply ingrained in local folklore, speaks of June 26, 1284, as the fateful day this tragedy unfolded, a date etched into the very stones of Hameln as a perpetual reminder of a broken promise and an unimaginable loss. Historians still argue whether the story of the Pied Piper is a literal account or a powerful allegory for a real historical event. Some theories propose that the children were not actual children but young adults who were recruited for the German colonization of Eastern Europe, perhaps lured away by a charismatic leader, the piper, promising a better life and land. These groups often left their homes, never to return, effectively disappearing from their communities. Imagine a medieval recruitment drive, but instead of a slick advertisement, it's a guy with a flute. Others suggest the legend is a dark metaphor for a devastating plague, perhaps the Black Death, which swept through Europe and decimated populations, especially the young. The rats could symbolize the disease, and the children, its victims, led away by an unseen, unstoppable force. It's a grim thought, isn't it? The idea that your town could be emptied not by a supernatural being, but by something far more mundane and equally terrifying, like a bad case of the medieval sniffles, but, fatal. There's even a quirky, fringe tidbit that suggests the legend might be linked to a phenomenon known as dancing mania or St. Vitus dance, where groups of people would spontaneously start dancing uncontrollably, sometimes for days, until they collapsed from exhaustion or even died. Could the piper's tune have been a metaphor for a mass psychological event, a contagious hysteria that led people away from their senses and their homes? It's certainly a more energetic way to disappear than just getting eaten by a bear. The truth, if it ever surfaces, remains shrouded in the mists of time, obscured by centuries of retelling and embellishment. But the core of the story, the profound sense of loss and the chilling consequence of a broken promise, resonates through the ages. It's a bedtime story that doesn't quite lull you to sleep, but rather makes you check the locks on your doors and perhaps, just perhaps, appreciate the absence of a mysterious, flute-playing stranger in your own quiet neighborhood. You're still hearing that faint, unsettling melody, aren't you? The one the Pied Piper played, luring away the children of Hameln. It's a tune that lingers, a ghostly echo of innocence lost. But as the shadows lengthen around us, you might find yourself wondering, as many have for centuries, was it real? Did 130 children truly vanish from a German town, spirited away by a mysterious stranger and his enchanted pipe? Or is this just a particularly grim fairy tale, spun from the threads of collective anxiety? Let's pull back the curtain on this enduring enigma, stepping carefully through the historical whispers and trying to separate the sweet, deceptive notes of folklore from the harsh, dissonant chords of grim reality. The legend, as you know, points to a specific date, June 26, 1284. A summer day, bright and full of life, suddenly plunged into an unimaginable silence as 130 children, by most accounts, followed a charismatic piper out of town and were never seen again. It's a precise detail, isn't it? The kind of detail that makes you lean in, makes you think, surely, something must have happened for them to pick that exact day. And indeed, something did happen. The town of Hameln itself, even to this day, bears the quiet scars of this legend. You can walk its cobblestone streets and find the Bungelow-Senstrasse, the street where no music or dancing is allowed, a silent memorial to the children's departure. There's a house, too, known as the Pied Piper House, adorned with a plaque commemorating the event. Even a stained-glass window, dating back to the 14th century, once depicted the piper and the children, though only fragments remain. These aren't just whimsical tourist attractions, they are historical markers, suggesting a deep-seated communal memory of a profound loss. But what kind of loss? This is where the historical detectives don their deerstalker hats and peer through the fog of time. One of the most compelling and widely accepted theories, a true mainstream historical fact, points to the phenomenon of eastward colonization. Imagine medieval Europe. Towns were growing, populations were expanding, and opportunities were scarce. To the east, in what is now parts of Poland, Bohemia, and Brandenburg, new lands were being opened up for settlement. Lords and bishops actively recruited colonists to populate these vast, untamed territories. These recruiters, often charismatic figures, would travel to overcrowded towns, promising land, freedom, and a better life. Picture it. A bustling marketplace, perhaps a little too crowded for comfort, and into this scene steps a well-dressed, perhaps even flamboyant individual. He doesn't play a pipe, perhaps, but he certainly spins a captivating tune with his words, painting vivid pictures of fertile fields and new beginnings. He promises a fresh start, a chance to escape the drudgery and confines of their current lives. And who would be most susceptible to such promises? The young, the adventurous, the dispossessed, those with little to lose and everything to gain. They would leave in groups, sometimes large ones, following these recruiters, our metaphorical pipers, eastward, often never to return to their original homes. It's not hard to imagine 130 young people, perhaps even children old enough to be considered laborers or apprentices, being enticed by such an offer, vanishing into the vastness of Eastern Europe. It certainly beats the medieval equivalent of trying to get a good job without experience. Now, while that theory offers a rather practical, if still poignant, explanation for a mass disappearance, let's explore a quirkier, more unsettling possibility. What if the piper's tune wasn't just metaphorical, but literal and deeply, terribly real? Enter the concept of dancing mania, or St. Vitus dance. This was a bizarre, almost unbelievable phenomenon that swept through parts of Europe during the Middle Ages, particularly in the 14th to 17th centuries. Imagine groups of people, sometimes hundreds strong, spontaneously beginning to dance uncontrollably in the streets, often for days on end, until they collapsed from exhaustion or even died. They would sometimes shriek, foam at the mouth, and experience visions. It was a mass psychogenic illness, a kind of collective hysteria, perhaps triggered by extreme stress, famine, or even fungal poisoning from contaminated rye, ergotism, which also caused St. Anthony's fire. So, what if the children of Hameln didn't follow a person so much as they succumbed to a collective, uncontrollable urge to dance, to move, to follow an unseen rhythm? The piper, in this scenario, isn't a human recruiter but the embodiment of this strange, frenzied compulsion. The children, perhaps more susceptible to such psychological contagion, might have danced themselves out of town, into the nearby Weser River, or simply into a state of delirium from which they never recovered or were never recognized. It's a fringe tidbit, certainly, but it paints a chilling picture of an entire generation swept away by something beyond their control, a silent disco that ended in tragedy. And honestly, it sounds a lot like a particularly aggressive viral dance challenge, only with far worse consequences than just TikTok fame. Of course, other theories abound. Some historians have pointed to devastating plagues or epidemics that disproportionately affected children. The piper, then, becomes a grim reaper figure, leading the young to their untimely end. Others suggest a natural disaster, like a landslide or a sudden flood from the Weser River, which could have swept away a large group of children playing near the bank. Or perhaps, more darkly, a less benevolent human agent, a child trafficker, a cult leader, or even a military recruiter for one of the numerous medieval conflicts, though the idea of 130 children being taken by force and never a peep about it afterwards seems a stretch, even for the Middle Ages. The truth is, historians still argue whether the Hameln story is a genuine historical event, a distorted memory of a real tragedy, or a moralistic fable designed to teach a lesson about broken promises and community responsibility. There's no definitive, smoking gun evidence. We have the legend, we have the town's enduring memory, and we have a handful of plausible, yet unproven, theories. It's like trying to solve a cold case from 7 centuries ago, with most of the witnesses long since turned to dust, and the only clues being vague whispers and very old graffiti. What we do know is that medieval life was hard and life was cheap. Children died young, whether from disease, accident, or simply being lost to the vast, unpredictable forces of nature or the equally vast, unpredictable forces of human migration. The story of the Pied Piper, then, becomes a vessel for these anxieties. It's a narrative that captures the fear of the unknown, the terror of losing one's children, and perhaps, a subtle condemnation of a society that couldn't protect its most vulnerable. It's a story whispered from parent to child, a cautionary tale wrapped in a chilling melody, reminding everyone that sometimes, even without monstrous gargoyles or bloodthirsty werewolves, the world could simply take things away, and leave behind nothing but the echo of a forgotten tune and the haunting question of what if. Then, we confront one of the most insidious and heartbreaking urban legends of all, the blood libel. You might think of urban legends as harmless campfire tales, things whispered in the dark for a quick thrill, but this one, my friend, was anything but. It was a dark stain, a poison that seeped into the very fabric of medieval society, especially targeting Jewish communities throughout the Middle Ages, with truly devastating real-world consequences that stretched for centuries. Imagine, if you will, the crowded, dimly lit streets we've been exploring. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, refuse, and human bodies. News travels slowly, distorted by distance and fear, but rumors fly. And here, in this fertile ground of suspicion and anxiety, a particularly horrific story begins to take root, slithering through the alleyways and settling like a cold mist over the towns. The rumor takes hold. Jewish people, so the story goes, secretly kidnapped Christian children, draining their blood for use in arcane rituals, particularly for making matzah during Passover. Yes, you heard that right. It sounds utterly preposterous, doesn't it? Like something out of a particularly grim fantasy novel, a plot twist so outlandish it would get a raised eyebrow from even the most dedicated conspiracy theorist today. Except this wasn't fiction. This was believed, truly believed, by many, twisting the everyday into something monstrous. The very first recorded instance of this horrific accusation washes over England in the cathedral city of Norwich, in the year 1144. You can almost picture it. A young apprentice, a boy named William, is found dead. And rather than investigate, truly investigate, the local authorities and some zealous clerics, notably a monk named Thomas of Monmouth, leaped to a conclusion that fit a pre-existing prejudice. They declared he had been ritually murdered by the city's Jewish community. This wasn't just a local spat or a tragic accident, it was a spark that ignited a wildfire of suspicion and hatred. The groundwork for a template of terror had been laid, a blueprint for accusation that would be tragically reused again and again across the continent. From Norwich, like a noxious weed, the blood libel began to spread. You see it pop up with alarming regularity in France, then Germany, then Spain, then across the vast expanse of the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. Each time, the pattern is eerily, heartbreakingly similar. A child goes missing, or a body is found, perhaps a body that has been dead for some time, whose cause of death is unclear, or even a body that has been deliberately placed. And instead of a diligent, evidence-based search for the true culprit, perhaps an accident, a common crime like kidnapping or murder for ransom, or even just a runaway, the finger of accusation points squarely at the nearest Jewish community. It's almost as if some people had a blame the Jews button always ready to be pressed, regardless of the evidence or complete lack thereof. It was a convenient, horrifyingly effective way to deflect blame, to unite a populace against a common, manufactured enemy. Why, you might wonder, would such an absurd and deeply offensive notion? This wasn't just about economic envy or social anxieties, though those certainly played a significant part. At its core, the blood libel was deeply intertwined with religious prejudice. The accusation often implied a mockery of Christian rituals, particularly the Eucharist, the central sacrament of the Christian faith. The idea was that Jewish people, having rejected Christ, were now perverting Christian symbols, using Christian blood in a perverse, blasphemous parody of the sacrament. It was a twisted, dark theological narrative, a way to dehumanize, to paint an entire people as not just enemies of the faith, but as monstrous, inhuman beings, intrinsically evil. You can practically hear the sermons thundering from pulpits, reinforcing these terrifying, baseless claims, shaping the very perception of their Jewish neighbors in the minds of the Christian populace. And the consequences were devastating. When a blood libel accusation took hold, you would see entire communities gripped by panic and rage, a terrifying mob mentality taking over. Local authorities, often swayed by public hysteria, their own biases, or even a cynical desire to seize Jewish property, would initiate arrests. Jewish individuals, sometimes entire families, would be subjected to brutal, unimaginable torture to extract false confessions. confessions, mind you, that were then used to prove the outrageous claims. It's a truly chilling example of a legal system gone completely off the rails, where the verdict was decided before the evidence was even fabricated, where the goal was not truth, but confirmation of a predetermined narrative. Imagine being accused of such a heinous crime, knowing it's a complete fabrication, yet having no recourse, no way to defend yourself against the overwhelming tide of popular delusion. It's like being accused of having 3 heads and then being asked to prove you don't. Spoiler alert: proving you don't do something you never did is notoriously difficult, especially when your accusers are already convinced of your guilt. Interestingly, while the blood libel was widely believed by the populace and often exploited by local rulers for their own nefarious ends, some higher authorities, including several popes, actually issued bulls condemning the accusations and forbidding their repetition. Pope Innocent IV, for example, in 1247, explicitly stated that Jewish people were not to be accused of using human blood. He even ordered the destruction of records of such accusations and forbade the molestation of Jewish people on account of them. Yet, despite these condemnations from the very top of the Catholic Church, the legend persisted, bubbling up again and again in different regions. It just goes to show you how deeply ingrained prejudice can be, how rumors can take on a life of their own, even when contradicted by official decrees. It's almost like trying to stop a runaway train with a strongly worded letter. The power of a deeply rooted lie, fueled by fear and ignorance, often outweighed the truth, even when spoken by powerful voices. Historians still argue whether the initial blood libel accusations were purely spontaneous outbursts of local prejudice, perhaps fueled by individual incidents of crime or misinterpretation, or if there was an organized effort by certain clerical or political factions to propagate these lies for specific gains, such as confiscating Jewish property or justifying expulsions. Was it always organic, a groundswell of misguided belief, or were there cynical puppeteers pulling the strings, knowing full well the devastating power of a terrifying lie? The truth is likely a complex blend of both, adapting to local circumstances but always finding fertile ground in a society ripe for scapegoating. The sheer insanity of it is truly mind-boggling. You're talking about a time when people believed in dragons and witches, yes, but this was a belief directed at real people with real, horrifying consequences. It wasn't a monster in the woods. It was your neighbor, or the baker down the street, suddenly transformed into a demonic figure in the collective imagination, simply because of their faith. The fear wasn't of something supernatural, but of the mundane, twisted into something monstrous by rumor, hatred, and an utter disregard for truth. This dehumanization, this painting of an entire group as bloodthirsty villains, provided the justification for waves of persecution. You see massacres, expulsions, and further restrictions on Jewish life tied directly to these baseless accusations. It's a stark reminder of how easily fear can be weaponized, how quickly a whisper can become a roar of hatred, and how fragile truth can be in the face of widespread prejudice. It's the kind of story that makes you want to curl up under your duvet and remind yourself that logic and evidence, however imperfectly, eventually win out, usually, but not without immense suffering along the way. So, as you drift off tonight, consider the chilling reality of the blood libel. It wasn't just a legend. It was a lived nightmare for countless individuals, a testament to the dark power of unfounded accusation and the enduring stain of prejudice on the tapestry of human history. A very, very dark stain indeed. You've just shuddered at the thought of the Pied Piper's shadowy exit, leaving a town bereft, but now you must steel yourself for something far more insidious, a darkness that didn't just haunt the periphery but struck at the very heart of communities. We're talking about the blood libel, a term that still sends a chill down your spine when you understand its full, horrific weight. Imagine, if you will, being accused of the most unspeakable crime, not because of anything you've done, but simply because of who you are, or more accurately, who others believe you are. This wasn't a legend of a monster lurking in the woods, or a magical being stealing children. It was a legend that turned neighbors into monsters, fueled by the most potent and destructive forces, fear and prejudice. You see, the blood libel was the utterly baseless, profoundly disturbing accusation that Jewish people ritually murdered Christian children, typically young boys, to use their blood, often for the making of matzah, the unleavened bread eaten during Passover. Just take a moment to absorb that. The idea that an entire group of people would commit such an atrocity as part of their religious practice. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if medieval people had a dedicated conspiracy theories section in their local scrolls library, right next to How to Cure the Plague with Leeches and Positive Thoughts. The sheer absurdity of the accusation, when viewed through a modern lens, is almost laughable. You might think, surely, no one actually believed that? But oh, they did. And this is where the dark heart of medieval prejudice beats strongest. You have to remember the context. A deeply religious, largely illiterate society, where difference was often viewed with suspicion and fear of the unknown ran rampant. Jewish communities, with their distinct customs, language, and religious practices, often lived in separate quarters, known as ghettos, set apart from the Christian majority. This physical and cultural separation, combined with centuries of theological friction, created fertile ground for whispers and distortions to take root. Imagine yourself walking through a bustling medieval marketplace. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, unwashed bodies, and damp earth. News, or rather, rumors, travel by word of mouth, distorted and embellished with each retelling. A missing child, a sudden illness, a bad harvest, in a world struggling to comprehend the complex forces of nature and society, it was often easier, and certainly more comforting, to find a simple scapegoat. And who better to blame than the other living in your midst? The first widely recognized instance of the blood libel accusation occurred in Norwich, England, in 1144, involving a boy named William. His body was found, and despite no evidence whatsoever connecting his death to the local Jewish community, a monk named Thomas of Monmouth began to propagate the story that William had been ritually murdered by Jews. This wasn't some isolated incident, a strange one-off. Oh no. This became a template. You can almost hear the echoes of that first whisper spreading across the continent, adapting to local fears and anxieties, like a particularly nasty medieval viral meme that just wouldn't quit. This wasn't just idle gossip, either. The blood libel was often actively promoted by certain elements within the church and secular authorities. It served as a convenient pretext for rulers to confiscate Jewish property, levy special taxes, or even expel entire communities. Think about it. If you, a king, needed to raise funds for a new war, or if you simply wanted to consolidate power, accusing a wealthy minority of a heinous crime could be incredibly expedient. It provided a moral justification for actions driven by greed or political ambition. It's like when you claim your cat definitely ate your homework because, well, the cat can't exactly argue, can it? Except in this case, the consequences were infinitely more dire. You'd often find these accusations flaring up around Easter, coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, coinciding with Passover, the very time when the alleged ritual was said to take place. This timing further stoked the fires of suspicion, playing on existing religious tensions. The evidence presented in these cases was almost universally fabricated, often extracted under torture. Imagine the terror. You're dragged from your home, accused of a crime you couldn't possibly have committed, and then subjected to unimaginable pain until you confess to whatever your tormentors want to hear. These coerced confessions were then used to prove the legend, trapping communities in a horrifying cycle of accusation and violence. One particularly grim aspect of these investigations was the almost miraculous way the bodies of the supposed victims would often be discovered. Sometimes, after a period of intense searching and growing suspicion, the body of a missing child would suddenly appear in a cellar, a well, or a field, often in a condition that conveniently pointed to foul play, and just as conveniently, to the Jewish community. It's almost as if someone had a rather theatrical flair for dramatic reveals. Or, just a total lack of ethics and a penchant for planting evidence. The consequences were devastating. You can practically feel the collective dread that would have settled over a Jewish community when such an accusation arose. What followed were often brutal pogroms, organized massacres, where homes were looted, synagogues burned, and people murdered in cold blood. Entire communities were expelled from cities and even countries, forced to abandon their homes and livelihoods, all based on a lie. You might have heard of the expulsions of Jews from England in 1290, or from France multiple times throughout the Middle Ages. While not always solely due to blood libel, these accusations certainly contributed to the climate of fear and hostility that made such expulsions possible and palatable to the wider population. Historians still debate the extent to which these accusations were spontaneous popular outbursts driven by genuine, albeit misguided, belief among the populace, versus orchestrated campaigns by powerful authorities seeking political or financial gain. It's a complex tapestry of human behavior, woven with threads of ignorance, fear, economic jealousy, and cynical manipulation. Was it the common folk, whipped into a frenzy by sermons and rumors, who genuinely believed their Jewish neighbors were child killers? Or was it the lords and bishops, pulling the strings, knowing full well the accusations were false but finding them useful tools for control and profit? Perhaps it was a horrifying dance between both, with each feeding the other's darkest impulses. This wasn't just a medieval problem, either. The blood libel, shockingly, persisted into the modern era, resurfacing in various forms and places, a testament to the enduring power of deep-seated prejudice and the terrifying ease with which a lie, once told, can embed itself in the collective consciousness. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones with fangs and claws, but the ones that reside in the human heart, fueled by unfounded fear and the willingness to believe the worst about others. It's a chilling thought to end on as you tuck yourself in, isn't it? The idea that a simple whisper, a baseless accusation, could lead to such widespread, unspeakable injustice and violence. It makes you appreciate the quiet of your room, far from the frantic, fearful whispers of medieval street. Now behold the myth of the wandering Jew, a figure who truly embodies the heavy weight of medieval belief and, frankly, a truly awful travel itinerary. You picture him, don't you? Not a backpacker with a worn copy of Lonely Planet, but a man of indeterminate age, perpetually trudging. His clothes are dusty, his face etched with the weariness of centuries, his eyes holding a gaze that has seen empires rise and fall like particularly dramatic sandcastles. This isn't just a legend, it's an entire lifestyle of never settling down. And honestly, who needs a gym membership when you're cursed to roam the earth ceaselessly? This isn't about a fun road trip, mind you. This is about an eternal curse, a judgment so profound it condemns a soul to perpetual motion, an endless witness to history's unfolding, whether he likes it or not. Imagine, if you will, the ultimate FOMO, but instead of missing out, you're constantly in it, forever. No Netflix and chill for this guy. Just endless, relentless walking. The story, as it solidified in the medieval imagination, often goes something like this. As Jesus trudged towards his crucifixion, bearing the weight of the cross, he paused, seeking a moment's rest at the doorway of a shoemaker named Ahasuerus, though his name changes depending on which medieval chronicler you're listening to. Ahasuerus, a man clearly having a very bad day, rudely rebuffed him, urging him to move on. "Go on, Jesus. Why do you tarry?" he snapped. And Jesus, with a solemnity that probably made Ahasuerus immediately regret his life choices, responded, "I shall stand and rest, but you shall go on until I return." And just like that, poof, eternal wanderer. From that moment on, Ahasuerus, or Cartaphilus, or whatever his name was that Tuesday, found himself unable to stop. His feet, once rooted in his little shop, were now compelled to carry him across continents, through ages, and past countless generations of people who were probably just trying to get some sleep. You can almost hear the soft thud 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 of his weary footsteps echoing through time, can't you? Through the bustling markets of Constantinople, the muddy battlefields of the Crusades, the quiet cloisters of monasteries, and the plague-ridden streets of quarantined cities. He's seen it all. He's probably been offered directions by people who weren't even born yet when he last saw Rome. He's the ultimate time traveler, only without the cool DeLorean or the ability to change anything. He's just there, always moving. Imagine the absolute exhaustion. You think your commute is bad? Try walking from Jerusalem to England, then to Spain, then back to Germany, and then maybe popping over to Russia, all without the benefit of a train, a horse, or even a decent pair of arch support sneakers. This is the original long-distance runner, only he never gets to cross the finish line. He just keeps running. Or walking. Very, very quickly. It makes you wonder if he ever just tried to sit down for a really long time, like, for a century or two, just to see what would happen. Probably not. The curse wouldn't allow it. It's the ultimate eternal treadmill, a truly medieval form of cardio. The mainstream historical fact here is that the legend of the Wandering Jew, while having roots in earlier Christian folklore about figures who slighted Christ, truly gained widespread prominence and a more defined narrative in Europe around the 13th century. It often appeared in chronicles, popular ballads, and even sermons, serving as a powerful moral parable. You could hear whispers of him appearing in various towns, always looking the same, always moving on, a living testament to divine judgment. It's like the medieval version of a cryptid sighting, only instead of Bigfoot, it's a very tired man who just wants to sit down. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit. One particularly persistent version of the legend, first documented in a German pamphlet in 1602, claims that the Wandering Jew, often named Ahasuerus in these accounts, would periodically appear in Europe, always looking about 50 years old, despite having lived for over a millennium. He was said to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of history, geography, and various languages, and would answer questions posed to him with a somber, unblinking gaze, often refusing any charity beyond basic sustenance. He would then simply vanish as mysteriously as he arrived, leaving behind only the profound sense of his ancient sorrow. It's like he was the ultimate pub quiz master, only he'd never stick around for the prize. You can almost hear him sighing, yes, King John signed the Magna Carta in 1215. Can I go now? Historians still argue whether the legend primarily served as a moral parable warning against impenitence, a form of anti-Jewish propaganda designed to perpetuate negative stereotypes, or simply a narrative expression of European anxieties about time, change, and the burdens of memory. Was he a cautionary tale, a scapegoat, or just a very persistent urban myth? Perhaps a bit of all three, morphing to fit the fears and prejudices of the age. Imagine the psychological toll. You are condemned to remember everything. Every war, every famine, every plague, every fleeting moment of joy and every crushing wave of sorrow. The faces of countless generations, the rise and fall of empires, the invention of printing presses, the discovery of new continents, it's all stored in one very, very ancient brain. He's seen fashion trends come and go, probably multiple times. He's probably witnessed the evolution of the wheel from a clunky disc to something with spoke. He's the ultimate historical database, but without a search function or an off switch. The medieval mind, fascinated by eternal punishment and divine justice, found a potent symbol in this perpetually moving figure. He was a living reminder of the consequences of disrespect, a spectral warning against a lack of compassion. He was also, unfortunately, a convenient figure to project anxieties onto, especially during times of social upheaval or religious tension. You wouldn't want to be him, though. The sheer volume of small talk he must have endured over the millennia. So, where are you from? Oh, everywhere. Just passing through? Forever. It truly puts your own travel woes into perspective, doesn't it? At least you get to go home and kick off your shoes. Section 10. And so, you find yourself contemplating the figure of the wandering Jew, a man condemned to an existence of perpetual motion, a narrative that, in the medieval mind, carried the immense weight of divine judgment and complex moral lessons. You imagine him, perhaps, trudging through muddy tracks, his cloak worn thin by centuries of wind and rain, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of countless ages. This isn't just a story of a man who can't sit still, it's a profound, often unsettling, exploration of sin, repentance, and the very nature of eternity. At its heart, this legend serves as a stark moral compass, pointing directly to the medieval understanding of compassion, or, rather, the catastrophic consequences of its absence. The core transgression, as you remember, was the refusal of a simple act of kindness, denying a moment of rest to Christ on his arduous path to Calvary. Imagine the scene. The exhausted figure of Jesus, perhaps stumbling, seeking a moment's respite against a wall, and then the callous dismissal from the shoemaker or doorkeeper or merchant, for the figure takes many forms across different versions of the tale. Go on. Why do you tarry? The legendary figure is said to have scoffed, only to hear the chilling reply, I go, but you shall tarry until I return. And with that, the die was cast, the curse invoked, setting him on a path of endless, restless wandering. You can almost feel the weight of that curse, the sheer, unimaginable burden of immortality without peace. Think about it. No quiet retirement, no cozy cottage by a babbling brook, no familiar faces to grow old with. Every friend, every acquaintance, every fleeting love, would turn to dust while he remained, ageless and alone. It's like being perpetually stuck on a cross-country road trip where the GPS just keeps saying, recalculating, and you never, ever reach your destination. You'd probably get tired of gas station coffee after the first century, wouldn't you? This perpetual exile was, for medieval Christians, a vivid illustration of divine punishment for a specific, unforgivable act of cruelty and rejection. It wasn't just about disrespecting Jesus. It was about rejecting the very essence of Christian compassion and hospitality. The wanderer became a living, breathing sermon, a cautionary tale made flesh, appearing in different towns, in different guises, throughout the centuries, always moving, always bearing the mark of his sin. He was said to have an unnaturally long life, never aging, never dying, a constant reminder of the consequences of one moment of harshness. Now, let's delve into the religious anxieties woven into this narrative. The legend of the wandering Jew, perhaps more than any other, is deeply, tragically intertwined with the pervasive anti-Semitism of the Middle Ages. While the earliest seeds of the legend might have been simple cautionary tales about compassion, its widespread adoption and popularization, especially from the High Middle Ages onwards, became a powerful tool for reinforcing negative stereotypes about Jewish people. The figure of the wandering Jew, often named Ahasuerus in later versions, or sometimes Cartaphilus, or even Isaac Lakedam, a quirky tidbit, how many aliases one man can accumulate over a millennium, was frequently depicted as a physical embodiment of the collective guilt attributed to Jews for the crucifixion of Christ. This was a profoundly unfair and historically inaccurate accusation, but it became a cornerstone of medieval prejudice. You see, the medieval Christian worldview often struggled with the continued existence of Jewish communities after the advent of Christianity. For many, the destruction of the Second Temple and the diaspora of the Jewish people were seen as divine punishment for their rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. The wandering Jew legend amplified this interpretation, portraying not just a single individual, but symbolically, an entire people condemned to wander without a homeland, perpetually exiled, until the Second Coming. It offered a seemingly tangible, living proof of God's judgment, justifying the social and legal marginalization, and often violent persecution, of Jewish people across Europe. This idea of perpetual judgment was terrifyingly potent. Imagine living in a society where a figure, cursed by God himself, might literally walk through your village, his very presence a reminder of a deep, ancient sin. It reinforced the idea that certain groups were eternally marked, eternally outside the grace of God, regardless of individual actions. This wasn't about individual repentance, it was about a collective, inescapable fate. The very thought would send shivers down your spine, wouldn't it? It's like having that one relative everyone talks about at family gatherings, but instead of just a bad reputation, this guy has a divine curse and shows up every few centuries to remind everyone. He probably doesn't get invited to many potlucks. Historians still debate the precise moment the legend solidified into its widely recognized form, but it certainly gained significant traction in written form with the publication of a German pamphlet in 1602, titled Kutze Beschreibung und Erzählung von einem Juden mit Namen Ahasverus, Short Description and Tale of a Jew named Ahasuerus. This pamphlet detailed the encounter between the wandering Jew and a bishop, solidifying many of the narrative elements that would persist for centuries. It became a bestseller, rapidly translated and disseminated across Europe, showing just how hungry people were for such a tale, and how effectively it resonated with existing religious and social anxieties. The moral lessons, therefore, are complex and contradictory. On one hand, it's a warning against heartlessness, against refusing aid to someone in need. On the other, it's a chilling narrative that fueled centuries of prejudice and violence, using a mythical figure to justify real-world suffering. The legend speaks to the human fascination with immortality. Who wouldn't want to live forever? But it flips the script, presenting it not as a gift, but as an unbearable burden, a perpetual penance. You can witness all of history, yes, but you can never truly participate, never find belonging, never know peace. It's the ultimate lonely journey, a solitary figure forever trudging through the sands of time, a ghost in a constantly changing world. And as you drift deeper into the medieval mind, you realize how these stories, whether meant as simple warnings or as tools of oppression, became part of the very fabric of belief, shaping fears and anxieties, whispering lessons of judgment and exile into the collective consciousness. The wandering Jew, in his eternal journey, was not just a character. He was a mirror reflecting the deepest hopes and darkest fears of the age. From the endless, mournful journey of the wandering Jew, forever bound to the roads of history, we now venture with trepidation to the very edges of civilization itself. You find yourself standing, metaphorically speaking, at the rough-hewn wooden gate of a small medieval village. The last rays of a blood-orange sunset bleed across the sky, painting the distant, ancient forest in shades of deepening indigo and ominous black. A chill wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles, whispers through the skeletal branches of the trees, and you can almost hear the forest floor sighing under unseen weight. This is where the world you know ends, and where the other world, the one filled with teeth and claws and the primal urge to hunt, truly begins. Here, beyond the flickering light of the hearth fires and the comforting, if flimsy, embrace of the village walls, the tales grow sharper, the fears more visceral. You hear the stories whispered in hushed tones over meager suppers, tales of things that once walked on two legs, spoke with a human tongue, and perhaps even shared a meal with your grandmother, but now roam on four paws, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. We're talking, of course, about werewolves, the ultimate embodiment of humanity's deepest fear, the beast within. Imagine, if you will, the sheer terror of knowing that your neighbor, the quiet weaver, or the gruff blacksmith, might, under the baleful gaze of a full moon, transform into a ravenous, fur-covered monster, driven by an insatiable bloodlust. It's like finding out your favorite influencer has a secret side hustle as a competitive eater, but instead of hot dogs, well, let's just say it's not vegan. You trudge along a muddy track, the sounds of the forest amplifying in the twilight. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, makes your heart leap into your throat. In the medieval mind, the line between man and beast was far thinner than we perceive it today. People lived closer to nature, their lives dictated by its rhythms and its dangers. The wild was not some picturesque landscape for a weekend hike. It was a hungry, unpredictable entity, teeming with wolves, bears, and other predators. It was only a small, terrifying leap of logic to imagine that some of these predators might once have been human, or that humans could, through some dark curse or unholy pact, become them. The concept of lycanthropy, the transformation of a human into a wolf, was not just a fanciful story. It was a very real and present fear, woven into the fabric of daily life in villages bordering the vast, untamed wilderness. The transformation itself, as described in these chilling legends, was a grotesque ballet of bone and sinew. You picture it, a person convulsing on the ground, their skin stretching and tearing as coarse fur erupts across their body. Their fingers elongating into claws, their teeth sharpening into fangs, a snout pushing out from their face. The human eyes, perhaps wide with terror or cold with a growing madness, shifting to the golden, predatory gaze of a wolf. And then the howl. Not the mournful cry of a lone wolf, but something deeper, more guttural, filled with a terrifying blend of human agony and bestial rage. It's the kind of sound that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end, even if you're safely tucked under your duvet. You just know that whoever or whatever made that sound is probably not interested in sharing a cup of chamomile tea. These aren't just wolves we're talking about. These are werewolves. They possess the cunning of a human mind, warped by the instinctual savagery of a predator. They are faster, stronger, and more relentless than any ordinary wolf, often described as unnaturally large, with glowing eyes and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Imagine the terror of a moonlit night, the village asleep, when suddenly a shriek pierces the stillness. You peek through your window, your breath catching in your throat, as a monstrous shadow darts past, dragging something small and limp into the darkness. The next morning, the tracks in the mud are too large for a regular wolf, and the few survivors whisper about a creature that walked on 2 legs, then 4, and disappeared into the depths of the forest, leaving only a trail of blood and despair. The fear of werewolves wasn't just about avoiding a bite. It was about the betrayal of trust, the corruption of the human form. How could you know who was truly human? Who harbored the beast within? This anxiety led to horrific consequences. Historians still argue whether the numerous werewolf trials that swept across parts of Europe, particularly in the late medieval and early modern periods, were truly about supernatural shapeshifting, or if they were a convenient means to persecute outcasts, vagrants, or those suffering from mental illnesses like clinical lycanthropy. During these trials, individuals, often isolated or eccentric, were accused of transforming into wolves and committing heinous acts. Under duress, and sometimes torture, many confessed to these impossible crimes, describing their transformations in vivid, chilling detail. One famous case, though slightly later, was that of Peter Stump, a German peasant executed in 1589, who confessed to being a werewolf for 25 years, devouring livestock and even his own son. He claimed to use a magic belt to transform, a quirky tidbit that adds a touch of almost fantastical detail to an otherwise grim reality. The ways to become a werewolf were as varied and terrifying as the creatures themselves. Some legends claimed it was a curse, passed down through bloodlines or inflicted by a witch. Others believed it was a punishment from God for a heinous sin, or even a willing pact with the devil himself. You could supposedly become a werewolf by drinking water from a wolf's footprint, by being bitten by another werewolf, or even by simply sleeping outdoors on a specific night of the full moon. It was a lottery of dread, where seemingly innocent actions could condemn you to a life of monstrous transformation. And once you were a werewolf, how did you stop it? Some believed a silver bullet, though more common in later lore, was effective. Others spoke of specific herbs, or even calling out the werewolf's human name during its transformation. But mostly the only cure was death. It really puts a damper on your social calendar when your biggest worry is not getting a bad hair day, but a bad fur day with added fangs. Imagine the psychological toll of living in a world where such transformations were believed possible. Every stranger passing through the village might be a potential monster. Every unexplained disappearance, every mauled sheep, every unsettling howl from the woods became evidence. You'd probably start eyeing everyone with just a little bit more suspicion, especially the quiet ones who always seemed to avoid eye contact. Maybe they just had social anxiety, or maybe they were planning their next midnight snack run, wolf style. The fear of werewolves wasn't just a fear of the wild animal, it was a profound fear of the unknown, of the hidden darkness within humanity itself, and of the terrifying realization that the thin veneer of civilization could be stripped away in a single, moonlit moment, revealing the ravenous beast beneath. You stand, for a moment, on the very edge of the medieval world, where the last flickering lamplight of a village gives way to the impenetrable, whispering darkness of the forest. The air grows colder here, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something wild. This isn't the neatly manicured woodland you might stroll through today, where the worst you'll encounter is an off-leash poodle or a misplaced picnic basket. Oh no. This is the primeval forest, a vast, untamed entity that swallowed up kingdoms, hid outlaws, and, in the medieval mind, concealed horrors beyond imagination. It's here, in this moon-drenched, shadow-draped wilderness, that the most primal of fears took on a truly monstrous form, the fear of the werewolf. Imagine the soundscape of that time. No cars, no constant hum of electricity. Just the rustle of leaves, the creak of ancient trees, the distant hoot of an owl, and perhaps most chillingly, the mournful, drawn-out howl of a wolf. For medieval people, wolves weren't just characters in cautionary tales, they were very real, very dangerous predators. They stalked the fringes of settlements, preying on livestock, and sometimes, when hunger was truly dire, on people. It's a tough gig being a shepherd back then, isn't it? Not only do you have to keep track of your sheep, but you also have to worry if one of your neighbors might suddenly decide they prefer lamb raw and with a side of human screams. But the fear wasn't just of the wolf itself. Oh, that was bad enough. The real terror was the idea that the beast wasn't just a beast at all. What if it was your neighbor? Your uncle? That quiet blacksmith who always seemed a little too fond of rare steak? This was the chilling heart of lycanthropy, the transformation of an ordinary human being into a ravenous, bloodthirsty monster. It blurred the lines between the known and the unknown, between civilization and the savage wild. You could build your walls high, lock your doors tight, but if the monster was inside the village, inside a human skin, then where could you truly be safe? It made you look at everyone a little differently, didn't it? A suspicious cough, a new scar, an unexplained absence during the full moon, suddenly, everyone's a suspect. The medieval mind, eager to explain the inexplicable, concocted various origins for this horrific transformation. Perhaps you were cursed by a vengeful witch, or maybe you made a terrible pact with the devil, exchanging your soul for the power and ferocity of the wolf. Some tales whispered of enchanted belts made from wolf skin, which, when donned, would instantly transform the wearer. You'd think someone would have tried to market a more comfortable, less lycanthropic belt, wouldn't you? Maybe one that just made your trousers stay up, without the urge to howl at the moon and chase small rodents. Other, even stranger, legends suggested that merely drinking water from a wolf's paw print could seal your fate. So, if you ever find yourself in a medieval forest, feeling parched, maybe stick to bottled water. Or, just don't drink from animal footprints. Good life advice, generally. These fears weren't just idle campfire stories, they manifested in terrifying ways. It's a mainstream historical fact that across medieval Europe, individuals were accused, tried, and often brutally executed for the crime of lycanthropy. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather a chilling testament to the profound belief in these shape-shifting monsters. Imagine the panic, the mass hysteria, when a series of unexplained livestock killings or even human disappearances occurred. The finger of suspicion would inevitably point towards the woods, and then, inexorably, towards someone a little bit different, a little bit isolated, someone who fit the terrifying narrative of the wolf man. Consider the real-world dangers that fed into these legends. Beyond actual wolves, the forests were often home to outlaws and bandits. These individuals, forced to live outside society, might adopt rough, animalistic appearances, perhaps even donning animal skins for warmth or camouflage. A sudden, violent attack by such a figure could easily be interpreted as the work of a werewolf by frightened, superstitious villagers. Then there were the medical conditions. Rabies, for instance, a terrifying disease that causes aggression, foaming at the mouth, and an aversion to water, could easily be mistaken for a supernatural transformation. Even certain mental illnesses or conditions like ergot poisoning, from contaminated rye bread, could induce hallucinations, convulsions, and violent behavior, leading people to believe they were transforming into beasts. It puts a whole new spin on, "you are what you eat," doesn't it? Suddenly, that rye bread isn't looking quite so wholesome. One particularly quirky tidbit from the folklore of some regions suggested that not all werewolves were inherently evil. Some were believed to be ordinary people cursed against their will, who might even try to warn their loved ones before a transformation, or who felt immense remorse after their nocturnal rampages. It's almost like a medieval version of a superhero origin story, if the superhero's power was accidentally eating livestock and terrorizing villagers, and their costume involved a lot of fur and drool. These unwilling werewolves were often seen as tragic figures, trapped between their humanity and their beastly urges, a far cry from the purely malevolent monsters of other tales. This duality made the fear even more complex. You might be terrified of the beast, but pity the human soul trapped within. The fear of werewolves also acted as a powerful social control mechanism. The wild, untamed forest represented chaos, everything outside the ordered, Christian society. To become a werewolf was to descend into that chaos, to lose your humanity and embrace the primal. It was a warning against straying too far from the path, both literally and metaphorically. If you wandered too deep into the woods, if you consorted with the wrong people, if you engaged in forbidden practices, you risked losing yourself entirely. Historians still argue whether these widespread werewolf trials were purely a reflection of genuine supernatural belief, or if they were also a convenient way to explain away violent crimes, enforce social norms, and eliminate undesirables in times of hardship and paranoia. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a terrifying cocktail of genuine fear, a need for explanation, and the ever-present human tendency to scapegoat. As you stand there, on the edge of that moonlit medieval forest, you can almost feel the chill of the unknown seeping into your bones. The whispers of the wind through the trees sound like guttural growls, the rustle of leaves like stealthy footsteps. Every shadow seems to hold a hidden shape, every distant sound a potential threat. The fear of the werewolf wasn't just about a monster, it was about the fear of the wild within us, the thin veneer of civilization, and the terrifying possibility that anyone, even someone you trusted, could succumb to the beast. And as the moon climbs higher, casting long, skeletal shadows, you can't help but wonder if, even now, somewhere in the forgotten corners of the world, those ancient fears still stir, just waiting for the right moment to emerge from the darkness. Now, as the shadows outside your window deepen and the world outside grows quiet, let's descend together. Not into dreams just yet, but into the shadowy realm beneath your feet, into the very earth that supports medieval cities. Imagine, if you will, the bustling, often chaotic surface world of the Middle Ages, the clamor of markets, the creak of cartwheels, the distant peal of church bells. You walk these cobbled streets, you navigate the narrow alleys, you know the layout of your town. Or so you think, because beneath it all, in the medieval mind, lay a labyrinth of secrets. hidden tunnels, forgotten catacombs, and vast hoards, just waiting to be stumbled upon or to swallow you whole. The very ground you trod was not, to the medieval mind, simply solid earth. It was a membrane, thin and porous, separating the known world from something ancient, something mysterious, something often quite terrifying. Think about it. Every city, every large town had some form of underground. There were cellars for storage, wells for water, cesspits for waste, and crypts for the dead. These were the mundane realities. But the human imagination, particularly when fueled by fear and whispers in the dark, doesn't stop at the mundane. It stretches these practical necessities into something far grander, far more sinister. You'd hear stories, wouldn't you? Whispers among the washerwomen at the river, hushed conversations in the tavern's smoky glow, tales told around a crackling fire on a long winter's night. Tales of secret passages, not just from the castle's dungeon to a hidden exit in the forest, but vast, intricate networks. These weren't just simple escape routes for a besieged lord. Oh no. These were rumored to be complex arteries, veins of stone and earth, connecting monasteries to cathedrals, noble houses to marketplaces, even entire cities to one another. Imagine the possibilities. A secret society, perhaps, moving unseen beneath your very boots, their hooded figures gliding through the darkness, their whispered plans echoing in subterranean chambers. Or a king, escaping an angry mob through a hidden passage beneath his throne room, only to pop out miles away in a farmer's field, looking utterly bewildered and probably in need of a good bath. A truly regal exit, wouldn't you say? The practical side of these tunnels, of course, was often far less romantic. Many actual underground passages were indeed for drainage, for transporting goods secretly, or for accessing water sources. But the legends? They transformed these damp, often rat-infested conduits into conduits of power, of conspiracy, of untold wealth. You might hear of tunnels dug by ancient, forgotten races, or by sorcerers of old, long before your city was even a twinkle in a cartographer's eye. Or perhaps by the very devils themselves, tempting mortals with forbidden knowledge or ill-gotten gains. Then there were the catacombs. While the famous Paris catacombs are a much later development, the concept of extensive underground burial sites existed throughout the medieval period. Many churches and monasteries had crypts, sometimes multi-layered, holding generations of the deceased. But the legends took this concept and expanded it exponentially. You'd hear tales of forgotten catacombs stretching for miles beneath the city, not just containing bones, but secret chambers, libraries of forbidden texts, or the eternal resting places of saints whose relics held unimaginable power. You might even hear of pathways leading to the very edge of the underworld, where the veil between life and death grew thin enough to pluck at your sanity. Imagine stumbling upon such a place. The air would be heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient dust. Your torch would cast dancing shadows, making the very walls seem to breathe. And what might you find? Not just skeletal remains, but perhaps a forgotten shrine, a sealed sarcophagus rumored to hold a sleeping king, or even a pathway to a place where time itself had warped. This fear of the unknown, of what lies hidden just beneath the surface, tapped into a profound human anxiety. The earth, which gives us life and sustenance, also receives our dead, holding its secrets close. And what secrets specifically? The hoards. This is where the legends truly sparkle, or perhaps glimmer in the dark. Not just a few coins, mind you, or a forgotten piece of jewelry. No, we're talking about vast hoards. Piles of gold so immense they could blind you with their reflected light, even in the deepest gloom. Chests overflowing with jewels, rubies like drops of frozen blood, emeralds the color of the deepest forest, diamonds sparkling like captured stars. These weren't just forgotten pirates' chests. These were the accumulated wealth of entire vanished civilizations, the hidden treasures of kings who died without heirs, the ill-gotten gains of notorious bandits, or even the magical artifacts of powerful sorcerers. You might hear a story about a dragon sleeping on its golden bed beneath the oldest part of the city, its scales shimmering with the light of its hoard. Or perhaps a tale of a forgotten Roman vault, sealed for 1,000 years, waiting for the one person pure enough or greedy enough to find its hidden entrance. The allure of such wealth was immense, a powerful motivator for exploration or for believing the most outrageous claims. After all, if you're a peasant barely scraping by, the idea of a mountain of gold just a few feet beneath your feet is far more appealing than the reality of another day spent tilling rocky soil. It's like finding out your attic isn't just full of old Christmas decorations, but also a secret passage to a vault filled with priceless antique video games. Imagine the resale value. One mainstream historical fact that fuels these legends is the very real existence of subterranean engineering in antiquity and the medieval period. Roman cities, for example, had sophisticated sewer systems and aqueducts, parts of which became lost or forgotten over centuries. In medieval Europe, many castles, monasteries, and even wealthy homes had secret passages for escape or storage, and the cellars of old buildings often connected to older, forgotten foundations. The city of Naples, for instance, sits atop a vast network of ancient Greek and Roman tunnels and quarries, many of which were indeed used as catacombs or hidden passages, creating a very tangible basis for such urban myth. A quirky, fringe tidbit that often popped up in these legends involved rat kings. Not literally royalty, but a gruesome phenomenon where rats' tails become intertwined and knotted together, often with feces or blood, forming a living, squirming mass. While rare, discovering such a thing in a dark, damp medieval cellar or sewer would undoubtedly fuel tales of monstrous, unholy creatures lurking in the depths, perhaps guarding a treasure, or simply existing as a dark omen. You can imagine the shudder that would run through a community hearing of such a discovery. Historians still argue whether the most elaborate of these tunnel networks, like those rumored to connect major European capitals, ever truly existed beyond the realm of pure fantasy, or if they were merely localized, practical passages blown wildly out of proportion by generations of fearful whispers. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, smaller, functional tunnels existing, and the human mind doing what it does best, expanding, exaggerating, and transforming the mundane into the magnificent or the terrifying. The fear of the unknown, the lure of hidden wealth, the thrill of forbidden knowledge, these were powerful currents in the medieval mind. You couldn't just Google, "Are there tunnels under my house?" You relied on whispers, on the vivid imaginings of your neighbors, on the occasional, terrifying discovery by a well digger or a grave robber. These subterranean secrets were a canvas for all the anxieties of the age: invasion, plague, poverty, divine judgment, and the ever-present shadow of the monstrous. And sometimes you just wanted to believe there was an easy way to get to the pub without having to deal with the mud and the sheep. A secret tunnel, perhaps, leading straight to the ale barrels? Now that would be a legend worth spreading. You've just peered into the dark, damp tunnels and imagined the hidden hoards they might conceal, but now, let's go deeper. Let's descend into the very earth beneath your feet, where the whispers aren't just about forgotten gold, but about forgotten worlds. Imagine, if you will, the cobblestones above you, the bustling marketplace, the ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, and then a profound silence beneath, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, echoing in vast, unseen caverns. It's in these imagined depths that the medieval mind conjured truly unsettling visions, not just a forgotten cellar, but entire ancient civilizations, perhaps even secret societies, dwelling in the perpetual twilight, influencing the world above from their hidden domains. Think about it. You walk through a medieval city, unaware that just meters beneath your shoes, an entire history, a whole secret existence, is unfolding. It's like discovering your downstairs neighbor has been secretly running a miniature, highly organized cult dedicated to competitive cheese rolling. You just wouldn't know. The very foundations of many medieval cities were, in fact, built upon the bones and bricks of older settlements. It's a mainstream historical fact that many European cities, like Rome or London, are literally layered, with Roman, Anglo-Saxon, and later medieval structures built directly atop earlier ones, often incorporating or burying their predecessors' foundations, sewers, and catacombs. So, when people dug a new well or a new cellar, or when old structures collapsed, they would often stumble upon incredibly intricate, ancient underground networks. These weren't just simple basements, they were often sophisticated Roman aqueducts, vast crypts, or complex drainage systems. Imagine the sheer wonder and terror of a medieval peasant digging for a new foundation, only to break through into a perfectly preserved, echoing Roman bathhouse, still smelling faintly of sulfur and ancient secrets. It would be enough to make anyone think twice about where their city truly began. And from this tangible reality, the legends blossomed. What if these tunnels weren't just abandoned? What if something or someone still lived there? The air would grow heavy, the silence would become oppressive, and your imagination would begin to fill in the blanks. Perhaps it was a race of creatures, like the infamous mole people, a quirky tidbit from some regional folklore, who were said to be pale, sightless beings, born and living entirely underground, surfacing only on the darkest nights to snatch away livestock or even unwary travelers. They were depicted as having incredible strength, adapted to their sunless existence, and a deep, guttural language that would curdle your blood if you ever heard it echoing from a grate. They were the ultimate, out-of-sight, out-of-mind neighbors, except when they decided to borrow a cup of sugar and your entire cow. Or perhaps it wasn't monstrous creatures, but something far more insidious: secret societies. You know, the kind with elaborate handshakes and even more elaborate robes, meeting in torchlit chambers beneath the bustling city. These aren't your local book club. These are groups whispered to hold forbidden knowledge, to practice dark arts, or to manipulate the levers of power from their hidden vantage point. Imagine hushed conversations, the clinking of beakers, the scent of strange herbs, all happening just beneath the feet of oblivious merchants haggling over turnips. You'd never know if the sudden rise in grain prices was due to a bad harvest or a decision made by shadowy figures in a subterranean chamber. It certainly gives underground economy a whole new meaning, doesn't it? Though, let's be honest, trying to organize weekly meetings in a damp, echoing tunnel with terrible acoustics must have been a nightmare. Did you say ritual sacrifice or ritual snack device? I can't hear you over the dripping. The legends spoke of these hidden groups possessing ancient wisdom, passed down through generations, perhaps from the very civilizations whose ruins they inhabited. They might have been alchemists, perfecting their craft away from prying eyes, or cults worshipping forgotten deities, or even rogue scholars preserving texts deemed dangerous by the Church. They were the ultimate deep state, before the concept even existed, pulling strings, influencing events, perhaps even orchestrating plagues or wars from their dark, unseen thrones. The fear wasn't just of what might be in the tunnels, but what power they exerted over the surface world. Did the prosperity of a city depend on the goodwill of its subterranean inhabitants? Did a sudden misfortune signal their displeasure? These legends tapped into a primal human fear, the fear of unseen forces, of powers beyond your comprehension, operating just out of reach. It fueled the suspicion of outsiders, the paranoia about witches and sorcerers, and the belief that there were hidden currents shaping destiny. Historians still argue whether the true extent of these underground networks and their use by organized groups for clandestine purposes was as widespread as the legends suggested, or if the folklore simply amplified the natural human awe and fear of the vast, unexplored spaces beneath their feet. Was it truly a network of influential secret societies, or just a few hermits and desperate outlaws hiding in forgotten crypts? The line between reality and legend blurred so easily when the darkness was so absolute and the echoes so convincing. And consider the practicalities. How would these subterranean societies sustain themselves? Were there vast underground farms, tended by the mole people, providing food for the shadowy elite? Or did they simply send agents to the surface, disguised as ordinary folk, to buy provisions and blend back into the shadows? Imagine trying to explain to the local baker why you need 50 loaves of bread every week, paid for in strangely tarnished silver, and always collected after midnight. It's for a very large, very hungry family. They prefer to eat in the dark. The thought of an entire city, or even a kingdom, being unknowingly governed or manipulated by a hidden power beneath its streets is truly chilling. It's the ultimate puppet master scenario, but instead of strings, they used whispers, fear, and the sheer mystery of their existence. You'd start to eye every manhole cover, every cellar door, wondering if it was a portal to another world, a world where the real decisions were made. It makes you think twice about complaining about your commute, doesn't it? At least you're not getting stuck in a traffic jam caused by a subterranean civilization trying to move their annual harvest of glowing mushrooms. These legends weren't just spooky stories, they were a way for people to grapple with the inexplicable. If a new disease swept through the city, if a ruler made a terrible decision, if a valuable artifact disappeared without a trace, it was easier, perhaps, to blame the unseen forces below than to confront the harsh realities of medieval life. It gave agency to the chaotic, a hidden logic to the illogical, and it made the ground beneath your feet feel less like solid earth and more like a thin crust over an abyss of secret. You'd never know what ancient, forgotten thing you might accidentally step on, or what hidden door you might inadvertently unlock with a misplaced tap of your heel. So, as you drift off tonight, remember that beneath the gentle hum of your modern world, there are layers upon layers of history, some seen, some forgotten, and some, perhaps, still waiting to be discovered. The medieval mind certainly thought so, and it made the ground beneath their feet a source of endless fascination and profound dread. Now, as the shadows lengthen outside our cozy room, and perhaps you're already feeling that pleasant pull towards slumber, let's venture into a realm where the line between science and sorcery blurred into an almost indistinguishable haze. Prepare to enter the mysterious, often malodorous, laboratories of the alchemist. You picture it, don't you? A flickering oil lamp casting dancing shadows on shelves laden with strange vials, bubbling retorts, and dusty, leather-bound tomes filled with cryptic symbols. The air is thick with the scent of sulfur, mercury, and something else, something faintly metallic and undeniably odd. In the medieval imagination, the alchemist wasn't just a quirky scientist. They were figures of immense power, often shrouded in a veil of secrecy, their motives as opaque as the thick smoke curling from their furnaces. Legends claimed they could achieve feats that defied nature itself, most notably, the transmutation of base metals into shimmering gold. Imagine the sheer audacity of such a claim. In an era where wealth was power, and gold was the ultimate symbol of both, the idea that a person could simply create it from lead or copper was, frankly, revolutionary. And terrifying. Because if someone could conjure gold, what else could they conjure? This wasn't just a medieval get-rich-quick scheme, though many certainly tried to make it one. Think of it as the ultimate medieval crypto-mining operation, but instead of digital algorithms, you're dealing with mercury and a prayer. The true alchemist, or so the legends whispered, wasn't merely interested in wealth. Their quest was often far more profound, aiming for the legendary philosopher's stone. This mythical substance wasn't just a key to unlimited gold. It was believed to be the ultimate panacea, a cure for all diseases, and even the secret to eternal life. It's like a medieval multi-tool, but instead of tightening screws, it grants immortality and makes you rich. Pretty neat, right? The pursuit of the philosopher's stone became the alchemist's magnum opus, their life's work. You'd find them hunched over alembics, meticulously heating, distilling, and combining substances, driven by ancient texts and cryptic diagrams. The process itself was often described in deeply symbolic, almost poetic terms, the blackening, the whitening, the reddening stages that mirrored spiritual purification as much as chemical reactions. It lent an air of arcane mystery to their work, making it seem less like practical chemistry and more like a sacred, forbidden ritual. And this sacred, forbidden aspect is where the sinister power comes into play. The Church, ever vigilant against anything that smacked of heresy or dabbling in the demonic, viewed alchemy with a healthy dose of suspicion. While some alchemists managed to operate under the patronage of curious nobles or even popes, many were seen as potentially consorting with dark forces. After all, if you could bypass God's natural order to create gold, or worse, create life, weren't you essentially playing God yourself? It was a dangerous game. You could find yourself lauded as a genius one day and then, with a single whisper of witchcraft, find yourself explaining your bubbling concoctions to an inquisitor the next. It's like trying to explain your obscure hobby to your great-aunt, but with higher stakes. Beyond the transmutation of metals, the legends also whispered of alchemists dabbling in the creation of artificial life. This was perhaps the most unsettling claim of all. Imagine, in their sealed laboratories, these reclusive figures were rumored to be growing tiny, fully formed humans, homunculi. The mere thought of it must have sent shivers down medieval spines. It wasn't just about playing God, it was about twisting the very essence of creation. How could life be formed outside the natural order? What kind of soul would such a creature possess? These were the questions that fueled the fear and fascination, turning the alchemist from a mere eccentric into a figure of genuine dread and wonder. It's important to remember that for every genuine experimenter, there were probably 10 charlatans ready to take your money with the promise of turning your rusted spoons into a golden chalice. These con artists preyed on the desperate and the greedy, setting up elaborate hoaxes involving hidden compartments, cleverly disguised alloys, and sleight of hand. Imagine the medieval equivalent of a Nigerian prince scam, but with more mercury fumes. You'd invest your life savings, only to be left with a pile of useless slag and a very distinct smell that wouldn't wash out. Yet, despite the mystique and the outright fraud, mainstream historical fact shows us that alchemy, in its own peculiar way, laid some foundational groundwork for what would eventually become modern chemistry. Alchemists, through their endless experimentation, discovered new elements, developed new laboratory techniques, and improved processes for metallurgy, dyeing, and even rudimentary pharmacology. They might have been searching for the philosopher's stone, but they stumbled upon a lot of genuinely useful stuff along the way, like figuring out how to make glass stronger or improving distillation methods. It's like trying to find Atlantis and accidentally discovering penicillin. A quirky, fringe tidbit about alchemical practice involves the use of Ouroboros, symbols, a snake eating its own tail, to represent cycles of transformation and renewal, not just in materials but in the alchemist's own spiritual journey. You'd find these symbols etched into their equipment, woven into their cryptic diagrams, suggesting that the quest for gold was often intertwined with a deeply personal, almost mystical pursuit of perfection. It wasn't just about the money. It was about becoming a better, purer you through the crucible of chemical change. Talk about self-improvement goals. Historians still argue whether alchemists were truly driven by spiritual enlightenment and a genuine desire to understand the universe's deepest secrets, or simply the promise of untold riches and the power that came with them. Was it a noble, if misguided, scientific endeavor, or was it simply the ultimate form of medieval speculative investment? Perhaps it was a bit of both, a messy blend of fervent belief, empirical observation, and human greed. So, as you picture the alchemist in their smoky lab, remember that they weren't just figures of science. They were characters in the grand, terrifying tapestry of medieval urban legends. Their dark arts, their whispers of creating life, and their quest for boundless wealth captured the public imagination, fueling both hope and profound unease. They were the ultimate secret keepers, dabbling in forces that most ordinary folk couldn't comprehend, making them perfect subjects for the wildest, most unsettling tales that traveled through those cobblestone streets. You've just glimpsed the alchemist's lab, a place of strange powders, bubbling retorts, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. But what if I told you their grandest dreams weren't merely about transforming base metals into glittering gold, or concocting elixirs for eternal life? Oh no, my sleepy traveler, some alchemists, in their most audacious, perhaps even hubristic, moments, dared to dream of something far more profound, far more unsettling, the creation of life itself. Not through divine intervention, mind you, but through sheer, painstaking, and utterly bizarre human ingenuity. Welcome to the chilling tales of the homunculus. Imagine, if you will, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows across dusty shelves, illuminating strange glass vessels filled with even stranger concoctions. You lean closer, your breath catching slightly, as the alchemist, with intense focus, whispers incantations over a sealed retort. Within, they claim, a tiny, fully formed human being is slowly, miraculously taking shape. This, my friend, is the homunculus, a miniature person, an artificial human, supposedly conjured into existence by human hands, not by any natural or divine process. It's the ultimate medieval DIY project. If your DIY project involved playing God and a whole lot of questionable ingredients, the very concept sends a shiver down the spine, doesn't it? It's a bold, almost blasphemous idea for an era deeply rooted in religious doctrine, where the creation of life was solely the purview of the divine. Yet, the whispers persisted, fueled by texts, both ancient and contemporary, that hinted at methods, however obscure or symbolic. Some of these texts, particularly those attributed to the enigmatic Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus, a mainstream historical fact you might recall from your more conventional history lessons, seem to offer tantalizingly specific, if utterly fantastical, recipes for bringing these tiny beings into existence. Paracelsus, whose full, wonderfully grand name was Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, was a truly fascinating character, a pioneer in medicine who also dabbled deeply in alchemy and mysticism. His writings, particularly a work called De Natura Rerum, on the nature of things, contained passages that were interpreted as literal instructions for creating a homunculus. You can almost hear the excited, hushed tones in hidden libraries as scholars and aspiring alchemists pored over these texts, trying to decipher the arcane instructions. The instructions were, shall we say, less add flour and water, and more bury a horse's uterus and wait for lightning. One particularly quirky or fringe tidbit from these legendary recipes involved placing human semen in a sealed glass vessel, burying it in horse manure for 40 days to putrefy, and then feeding the resulting, thing with human blood for another 40 weeks. The end result, supposedly, was a miniature, translucent human, perhaps no bigger than your thumb, who would then serve its creator. It certainly makes you appreciate modern ethical guidelines for scientific research, doesn't it? And you thought feeding a sourdough starter was a commitment. Imagine having to constantly provide fresh blood for your tiny, test tube human. The grocery list alone would be quite something. The motivations behind seeking to create a homunculus were varied and often contradictory. For some, it was the ultimate pursuit of forbidden knowledge, a desire to unlock the very secrets of existence, to understand the spark of life itself. It was the medieval equivalent of trying to crack the universe's source code. For others, it was about power, a miniature servant, a source of arcane wisdom, perhaps even a magical familiar that could reveal hidden treasures or future events. You could finally get that tiny, dedicated assistant who never complains about fetching your philosopher's stone, or who could tell you which stock to invest in before the market even opens. Though, given the methods of creation, you'd probably be more worried about whether it was plotting your demise. These tales of homunculi were not just confined to the dusty tomes of alchemists. They seeped into the popular imagination, becoming another layer of the medieval urban legend. You can imagine the fearful whispers in taverns and marketplaces. Did you hear about Master Alchemist so-and-so? They say he keeps a little man in a jar, and it whispers secrets to him at night. The mystery surrounding alchemists, their reclusive habits, and their often unconventional experiments made them fertile ground for such fantastical accusations. They were already dealing with volatile chemicals and strange apparatus. Adding a tiny, artificially created human to the mix just seemed par for the course. The creation of a homunculus was seen as the ultimate expression of pushing the boundaries of medieval science and belief. Alchemists, in their relentless quest for transformation, were not just trying to turn lead into gold, they were attempting to usurp the divine prerogative of creation. This put them in a precarious position, often walking a tightrope between scientific inquiry, spiritual enlightenment, and outright heresy. The Church, ever vigilant against practices that smacked of witchcraft or blasphemy, viewed such endeavors with deep suspicion. To create life outside of God's design was to challenge the fundamental order of the universe, to trespass into forbidden domains. Historians still argue whether these accounts were literal attempts at creation, allegories for spiritual transformation, or simply elaborate hoaxes designed to impress patrons and inflate the alchemist's reputation. It's entirely possible that some alchemists, perhaps with a flair for the dramatic, might have used clever tricks or optical illusions to convince gullible patrons that they had indeed birthed a tiny human in a flask. After all, if you're already selling potions that promise eternal youth, why not throw in a miniature sentient being for good measure? It's a fantastic marketing gimmick, if nothing else. Buy my elixir, and I'll even throw in a free homunculus. Batteries not included, because it runs on your life force. The homunculus, therefore, embodies the medieval fascination with the unknown, the desire to control nature, and the deep-seated anxieties about forbidden knowledge. It represents humanity's eternal struggle with the limits of its own power and the ethical implications of scientific advancement, even in an age when science was deeply intertwined with magic and mysticism. These tales remind us that the quest for knowledge, even if it led to the absurd or the terrifying, was a driving force in the medieval mind. They were wrestling with questions that still echo today. What does it mean to be human? Can we create life? And should we? As the candlelight flickers, you can almost feel the weight of these questions, the scent of ambition and strange chemicals hanging in the air. The alchemist, perhaps, wasn't just stirring a pot, they were stirring the very fabric of existence, daring to imagine a world where humans could become creators, not just creatures. And in that daring, they birthed not just legends, but a profound reflection on the nature of life, power, and the terrifying allure of the forbidden. Finally, as the shadows truly lengthen and the last vestiges of the day fade, we encounter perhaps the most haunting figures to emerge from medieval urban nightmares: the plague doctors. Imagine, if you will, the sheer, unadulterated terror of their arrival. You are already living in a city gripped by an invisible enemy, a creeping dread that steals loved ones without mercy. Every cough, every ache, sends a shiver down your spine. And then you hear the slow, deliberate footsteps approaching your door, accompanied by the tap-tap-tap of a long staff. You know who it is before you even see them. They stand there, a silhouette against the fading light, a figure that seems to have stepped directly out of a fever dream. Clad in a heavy, ankle-length, waxed leather coat that looks less like protective gear and more like a grim uniform, they are a vision of macabre practicality. Their hands are encased in thick gloves, and their head, oh, their head. It's covered by a wide-brimmed hat, but it's the mask that seizes your breath. A long, grotesque beak protrudes from the face, resembling some nightmarish bird of prey. Two small, dark glass eyes stare out from behind it, utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. It's the original, medieval version of "please maintain social distancing," only instead of a friendly reminder, it's a warning wrapped in a feathered, leathery nightmare. This iconic ensemble, while terrifying, actually had a practical, if misguided, purpose, according to the prevailing medical theories of the time. The long coat and gloves were meant to prevent contact with the diseased, though their efficacy against a microscopic enemy was, shall we say, debatable. The most famous element, the beak mask, was designed to hold aromatic substances, herbs, spices, dried flowers, even vinegar, to filter the air. This was based on the widespread belief in the miasma theory, the idea that diseases like the plague were caused by bad air or noxious fumes emanating from decaying matter. So, while you might think they were just trying to look fashionably frightening for their next ghoulish photoshoot, they were actually attempting a form of very early, very stylish, and utterly ineffective personal protective equipment. It was like wearing a potpourri sachet on your face to fend off a grizzly bear. Points for effort, but not for result. Their practices, too, were the stuff of unsettling urban legend. These weren't your friendly neighborhood GPs. Often, plague doctors were not highly trained physicians, but rather second-rate doctors, surgeons, or even simply volunteers appointed by cities desperate for anyone willing to deal with the overwhelming number of sick and dying. Their cures were often as terrifying as the disease itself. You might find them attempting bloodletting, slicing open veins to drain bad humors from the body, or lancing the swollen, painful buboes that characterize the plague, often with unsterilized tools. Imagine the pain, the fear, the utter hopelessness as this beaked figure approaches you with a knife. It's enough to make you consider a career change to professional healthy person. Beyond these more common, albeit horrific, treatments, the urban legends surrounding plague doctors spun wilder tales. Whispers circulated of their more bizarre remedies. Some advocated for rubbing onions, herbs, or even chopped up snakes on the buboes. Others suggested drinking mercury or arsenic, which, as you can imagine, tended to expedite the patient's demise rather than cure them. There were even tales of doctors trying to draw out the disease by applying live chickens to the patient's body, presumably hoping the chicken would absorb the illness. It makes you wonder if they had a chicken health insurance plan for these poor birds. You can almost hear the medieval equivalent of cluck cluck, this isn't what I signed up for. The very presence of a plague doctor in a neighborhood was a chilling omen. Their arrival meant death was near or already present. They became synonymous with the Grim Reaper, their dark silhouette a harbinger of doom. This association fueled urban legends that painted them not just as ineffective healers, but as something far more sinister. Did they intentionally spread the disease to ensure continued employment? Did they prey on the dying, stealing valuables from their homes? Were their cures actually poisons designed to hasten death for nefarious purposes, perhaps to collect a fee from the city for a completed case? These were the terrifying questions whispered behind closed doors, fueled by desperation and distrust. One particularly unsettling fringe tidbit involves the idea that some plague doctors were believed to have a special touch that could identify those already marked for death. They didn't need to examine you, they simply knew. This added another layer of supernatural dread to their already fearsome reputation. They weren't just medical practitioners. They were almost like psychopomps, guiding souls to the afterlife, whether they intended to or not. This belief, of course, was likely a psychological coping mechanism for communities overwhelmed by death, attributing a mystical power to those who witnessed it most frequently. Historians still argue whether the general public truly distinguished between the official, city-appointed plague doctor and the numerous quacks and charlatans who also roamed plague-stricken areas, preying on the desperate. The iconic image of the beaked doctor might have been a composite of many fears and experiences, rather than a single, consistent type of medical professional. Were they truly dedicated, if misguided, public servants, or were they primarily opportunistic figures leveraging widespread panic? The truth, as often happens, likely lies somewhere in the murky middle, a blend of dedicated individuals and those who saw an opportunity in the chaos. The urban legends surrounding plague doctors reflect a profound fear of the unknown, of an enemy that couldn't be seen or understood. In a world without germ theory, these bizarre, masked figures represented humanity's desperate, often futile, attempts to control an uncontrollable force. They were the embodiment of medieval medicine's limitations and the psychological impact of living through an apocalyptic event. Their unsettling appearance and macabre practices solidified their place in the collective nightmares of the era, turning them into figures of dread that continue to send shivers down our spines even today. It's hard to imagine a worse gig, really. Imagine the performance reviews. Patient mortality rate, 99.9%. Style points, 10 out of 10. Needs to work on bedside manner. As the macabre image of the plague doctor slowly fades from your mind's eye, a curious quiet descends upon the cobblestone streets we've traversed tonight. The whispers of the past, though no longer distinct voices, still echo, don't they? You find yourself standing at the crossroads of history and imagination, contemplating how these truly insane medieval urban legends continue to reverberate through our own understanding of fear, the insidious power of rumor, and the very fabric of the past itself. You might imagine these tales as dusty scrolls tucked away in forgotten archives, quaint curiosities from a bygone era. But look closer. The fears that birthed the monstrous gargoyle, the treacherous tune of the Pied Piper, the dark stain of blood libel, or the eternal curse of the wandering Jew, they aren't so alien, are they? These weren't merely bedtime stories for medieval children, though some certainly were. They were living, breathing narratives that shaped daily life, dictated social interactions, and, tragically, often led to real-world persecution and violence. Consider the primal fear. The gargoyles springing to life, the werewolves lurking just beyond the village palisade, the unseen horrors beneath your feet in those subterranean tunnels. These speak to a fundamental human apprehension of the unknown, the untamed, the things that lurk in the shadows or defy rational explanation. In an age before scientific understanding could demystify the world, every creak of the floorboard, every rustle in the woods, every unexplained illness could be attributed to malevolent forces or supernatural beings. It's the same basic human instinct that makes you jump when you hear a strange noise in your own house, isn't it? Or why you might still glance over your shoulder when walking alone down a dark street. We've simply swapped out stone creatures for, well, let's just say some modern garden gnomes look suspiciously like they're planning something. Then there's the potent, often destructive, force of rumor. Imagine a world without instant news feeds, without fact-checkers, without a quick Google search to verify a claim. Information traveled by word of mouth, distorted and embellished with each retelling, fueled by anxiety and confirmation bias. A single whisper about a hidden hoard beneath the city could send people digging up their basements. A baseless accusation, like the blood libel, could ignite a pogrom, sweeping through communities with devastating speed. These stories, whether they were about alchemists creating life in their labs or the terrifying practices of plague doctors, weren't just entertainment. They were often the only explanation available for the inexplicable. It was the medieval equivalent of your aunt forwarding a chain email about a miracle cure for everything from bad hair days to existential dread, except with far more serious consequences. This power of unverified information is a mainstream historical fact that historians have studied extensively. The oral tradition was the primary means of communication and cultural transmission for centuries, making societies particularly vulnerable to the rapid spread of both genuine news and malicious falsehoods. The lack of widespread literacy and reliable mass media meant that a compelling, fear-inducing story could take root and spread like wildfire, shaping public opinion and even policy, long before the printing press began to standardize information dissemination. What do these legends tell us about the past? They paint a vivid picture of a world steeped in superstition, where the line between the sacred and the profane, the natural and the supernatural, was incredibly blurred. They reveal a society grappling with immense challenges: disease, famine, war, and profound social inequalities. The wandering Jew, for instance, became a vessel for anxieties about divine judgment and the nature of eternal suffering. The Pied Piper, whether based on a real event or not, tapped into the very real fear of losing children, a devastatingly common occurrence in an era of high infant mortality and frequent abductions. These legends also provided a framework for understanding and explaining the inexplicable. If a child went missing, perhaps it was the piper. If a community faced an outbreak of plague, perhaps it was the grim work of a plague doctor with sinister intentions, or even the result of black magic practiced by an alchemist. They offered a narrative, however fantastical, in a world that often lacked scientific explanations. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in such supernatural occurrences was a genuine reflection of the medieval populace's daily worldview, or if these narratives were sometimes deliberately cultivated by authorities or the church to maintain social order and control. It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? Were people truly seeing werewolves, or was it a convenient explanation for a particularly grisly murder? And what about the quirky tidbits? You might be surprised to learn how many of these medieval urban legends have found new life in our modern world. The idea of hidden subterranean tunnels beneath cities, once a medieval whispered fear, has morphed into modern conspiracy theories about secret government bunkers or ancient alien civilizations living underground. The homunculus, that tiny artificial human created by alchemists, is arguably the ancestor of our modern fascination with artificial intelligence and robotics. The idea of creating life, or something akin to it, still thrills and terrifies us. Even the concept of fake news and viral misinformation, which feels so contemporary, is just a high-tech echo of medieval rumor mills, proving that while the medium changes, human susceptibility to a good, shocking story remains constant. It seems we never quite learn that if something sounds too good or too bad to be true, it probably is. Though, if an alchemist could turn lead into gold, I'm pretty sure we'd all be trying to find their hidden lab, wouldn't we? Just saying. So, as the night deepens and the last vestiges of these insane medieval urban legends begin to recede into the shadows, remember this. They are more than just stories. They are reflections of enduring human fears, warnings about the power of unchecked rumors, and invaluable windows into the minds of people who lived centuries ago. They remind us that while the world changes, the fundamental anxieties of the human heart often remain surprisingly constant. And perhaps, just perhaps, they offer a gentle reminder to question what you hear, to look beyond the surface, and to appreciate the comforting light of reason in a world that can still, at times, feel very dark and mysterious. The stories we've explored tonight, from the animated gargoyles to the eerie secrets of the plague doctors, are now settling gently in the quiet chambers of your mind. Allow them to softly drift, like motes of dust dancing in a moonbeam. The medieval world, with all its shadowed corners and whispered wonders, is slowly receding, becoming a distant echo. The fears that once stalked cobbled streets are now just faint murmurs, carried on a breeze that barely stirs the curtains. You are safe here, nestled in the present, far removed from the anxieties of ancient times. Let the images dissolve, let the strange tales soften into a comforting hum. The night air grows still, the world outside hushes its busy sounds, and your own breath deepens, slowing to a peaceful rhythm. There is only quiet now, and the gentle embrace of rest.